Sansa Stark felt the chill of the evening air brushing against her cheeks even as the last remnants of dusk clung stubbornly to the spires and crenellations of the Red Keep. It was a curious thing, she thought, that in the south, where the sun was warm and the breezes often gentle, she could still feel the ever-present ghosts of the north calling to her through the deepening shadows. She stood on a narrow balcony overlooking the gardens where the lemon trees grew, the faint perfume of their blossoms just reaching her senses as she clutched her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. She had lived through so many betrayals within these walls, Joffrey's cruelty, Littlefinger's manipulations, the Lannisters' scheming, that she often wondered if a piece of her would always remain trapped in King's Landing, frightened and alone. But there was something about this night that felt different. The step of approaching footsteps behind her was careful, nearly inaudible to anyone not used to listening for whispers of harm. But Sansa heard them. She turned gently, half fearing to see a golden lion or a mocking smirk. Instead, there stood Margaery Tyrell, and all at once, the faint light from the last touches of dusk framed her hair in a gentle auburn halo, echoing the swirl of color in the sky. She looked regal in her pale gown, though she wore no grand cloak or jewels this evening. It struck Sansa that they were both unadorned, free of the showy trappings of royal or noble ambitions. Just two young women who had known too much grief, too much manipulation, standing alone in a corridor that smelled of lemons and the quiet hush of gathering night. Margaery smiled, the corner of her lips curving with a subdued warmth. "I wondered if I'd find you here," she said quietly. "I remember you once told me you enjoyed the lemon trees. How they reminded you of something sweet." Sansa recalled that conversation vividly. It had been in a happier time, or as happy as it could ever be in King's Landing, when they had spoken of fruit tarts and memories of home. Lemon cakes, of course. They had exchanged shy confidences of childhood pleasures, of dreams that seemed so far away now, drowned in politics and the swirl of vicious rumor. Yet, Margaery had never turned cruel. She had remained a subtle ally, a potential friend. A part of Sansa had always wanted to trust her but feared betrayal. That was how one learned to survive, to trust no one. Still, tonight, Margaery's eyes brimmed with sincerity. Sansa had an immediate, uncanny intuition that whatever words were about to be spoken would be important, perhaps dangerous. She drew in a careful breath and gave Margaery a small nod. "The lemon trees are lovely in the twilight," she said softly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Though I still find it strange to see them here, so far from the north." "They bring a hint of brightness to this place," Margaery replied, then added with a more serious tone, "and we could all use a bit of brightness, could we not?" Sansa didn't reply, not right away. The question hovered in the air, a coded invitation to something more than just a pleasant exchange. The silence gathered around them, broken only by the stirring of breezes among the leaves, a light rustle that seemed to conspire with Margaery's measured voice. Cersei's shadows were everywhere. Any conversation that hinted of disloyalty or secrecy might quickly spread, and it would end in pain. Margaery gave a glance up and down the corridor. "We should talk somewhere else." Sansa's heart began to pound. Instinct told her to run, to hide, to beg off with an excuse. She remembered the times she had been lured or directed or maneuvered before for Joffrey's amusements, for Littlefinger's plotting. And yet something stirred in her that refused to yield. The Margaery before her was not those men. She was a woman who'd tasted a share of sorrow, whose father and brother had died in the war, who had gambled her future to become queen beside Joffrey only to watch the boy king choke at his own wedding. Despite all that, she stood strong, unbroken. "All right," Sansa said quietly. "Lead the way." They glided through a series of dimly lit halls and passageways that seemed half forgotten. Sansa noticed Margaery's caution, her eyes flicking to corners, her step pausing before each turn. At last, they found themselves at an unremarkable door near the eastern wing of the keep, a place seldom visited, part of the labyrinth of storerooms that servants used. Margaery pressed the door open to reveal a small chamber, empty but for a single wooden bench and a single sputtering torch. Sansa raised her brow in question, but Margaery stepped aside to let her in, closing the door behind them. When the sound of the bolt sliding home echoed in that cramped space, Sansa felt her pulse begin to race. The enclosed walls made her feel as though the shadows were pressing in on her. But Margaery, calm as ever, lit another small lantern set on the bench. By its glow, Sansa could see the tension in Margaery's features. "We're safe here," Margaery said after a moment. "There are no hidden entrances, no niches. I had this place checked by people I trust." Sansa studied her. "Who do you trust?" Margaery gave a delicate smile. "A few Tyrell guardsmen who've served my house for generations. There are loyal servants in the city, fewer every day, but they exist. You learn who to confide in, piece by piece, if you want to survive a place like this." Sansa let out a shaky breath. And what is it you want from me? Margaery's hands moved restlessly, then stilled, as if she were carefully crafting her next words. I suspect we want the same thing, Sansa. The use of her actual name, without titles, felt almost intimate. We want to see Cersei Lannister's reign of fear ended. We want to see the Seven Kingdoms at peace. And I, for one, am tired of these never-ending games for the Iron Throne. I'm tired of trusting in men who think war is the only solution. Are you not? She let the question hang. Sansa closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father, her mother, her brother, the ruin the war had caused. Yes, she was tired. Tired of fear, of whispered rumors, of high lords seeking to curry favor with a queen regent who cared only for the advancement of House Lannister. Tired of seeing the small folk suffer. Tired of seeing blood spilled for the monstrous pride of those who thought themselves unstoppable. A flicker of hope stirred in her chest. Hope that perhaps she was not alone in her desire to end the madness. Yes, Sansa said. Her voice trembled. I'm so tired of it all. Margaery nodded, her expression transforming with a quiet relief. I hoped you would feel as I do. You see, the Tyrells are not beloved in the north, just as the Lannisters are hated. But there is something I learned from my grandmother. Alliances can be made that defy old enmities, if there's enough need. House Tyrell has the breadbasket of Westeros under our watch. The north is vast and loyal to House Stark. If we were to combine strengths— Sansa blinked in surprise. You speak as though I hold the north in my hands. Don't you? Margaery tilted her head. By birth and by right you do. If ever the north were to see you, their trueborn daughter, stand against the tyrants in King's Landing, they would gather. Even your half-brother, Jon, who serves as Lord Commander at the Wall, would be forced to consider where his loyalties lie. But more than that, you, Sansa, are a symbol of Stark resilience. If we want to see Cersei peacefully removed, we need the hearts of the people. And the hearts of the people, from the far north to the Dornish marches, are torn and weary and ready for something else. Sansa let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. A symbol, she whispered. I've always been a pawn. A symbol in Joffrey's court, a symbol in Littlefinger's schemes, a bargaining chip. And now you want me to be a symbol again. But is that so terrible, if this time it's for something good? Something that might bring genuine peace? Margaery's eyes flickered with understanding. I know how it feels to be used, she said quietly. Married off here and there, as though I were nothing but a piece on a board. It's time we became the players, don't you think? Sansa felt a tightness in her chest that she recognized as fear, but behind it was something else. Determination. She looked at Margaery, a woman who was meant to be queen, a woman whose cunning was as soft-spoken as her beauty was heralded. Many underestimated Margaery Tyrell as simply a pretty face. Sansa herself had once considered her a kind of ally with uncertain motives. But now she realized there was a core of steel beneath that pretty smile. Together, they might accomplish a great deal. What do you propose? Sansa asked. Margaery's smile became all intent and purpose. A council. A secret one comprised of women and men we trust absolutely, who share a goal of removing Cersei from power without plunging the realm into another war. She paused, letting the enormity of her words settle. We have cunning, we have resources, and with a bit of careful planning, we can orchestrate a transition of power that will shake the realm in the best possible way. Will you join me? Sansa's heart thundered. She recalled the horrors she had endured, how passivity had almost consumed her. But here, in this hidden room, she felt the ghosts of her mother and father urging her forward, telling her to be brave as a Stark ought to be. She remembered the words of her sister Arya, though they had been parted for so long, leave one wolf alive and the sheep are never safe. But Sansa did not hunger for slaughter. She longed for a quiet, determined end to the bloodshed. If there was a chance, even the faintest one, that they could unseat Cersei Lannister without a single sword unsheathed in anger, how could she not try? She lifted her chin. Yes, she said. I'll join you. The first meeting of their secret council took place 3 nights later in an abandoned building on the outskirts of King's Landing. It was a far cry from the secret storeroom in the Red Keep. This was a disused stable behind a scorched shell of a workshop, one that had never been repaired after the riots years before. By day, it looked like nothing more than a ruin. By night, it was a place for hushed conversations, cloaked figures slipping in and out beneath the moonlight. Sansa arrived in a plain cloak hood pulled low over her hair. She felt her stomach twisting with a mixture of nerves and excitement. She had never been an instigator of anything so clandestine. She had always been the polite girl, the obedient lady. But the memory of her parents' downfall burned in her mind, the way her father's head had stood on a spike upon the walls of this cursed city. If she was to be more than a pawn, this was where it would begin. Margaery was already inside, speaking softly with an older woman who wore a homespun cloak. The woman turned, and in the flicker of the lantern, Sansa recognized her. Leonette Fossaway, a lady-in-waiting to Margaery who had once served at Highgarden. Leonette offered a small curtsy. "Lady Sansa," she greeted. "It's an honor to meet you again." Sansa nodded, remembering how Leonette had once gently helped brush out her hair before a feast. It felt like another lifetime. "It's good to see you," she replied softly. Margaery introduced two more individuals, Ser Tallad, a loyal knight who had been wounded in the war and who harbored little love for Cersei, and a quiet but sharp-eyed man named Hoster, once a guard in House Tyrell's service. They were joined shortly by a trio of new arrivals. A merchant's son who had close ties to trade routes, a silent-faced steward from the Red Keep who was loyal to Margaery's grandmother, the Lady Olenna, and to Sansa's faint shock, a woman she recognized from the north. A minor retainer who had somehow survived the fall of Winterfell but ended up in King's Landing. When they had all settled into a loose circle, the tension was palpable. Sansa could see each of them measuring the others, gauging their sincerity. The merchant's son wrung his hands nervously, the steward clutched his cloak, and Ser Tallad watched every shadow with suspicion. But Margaery exuded a calm confidence. Sansa found herself admiring that certainty. It helped steady her own pounding heart. Margaery wasted no time. "We have gathered tonight," she began in a low voice, "to find a path toward a new order in King's Landing, one that does not see the realm torn apart again." She looked around, meeting each pair of eyes. "We all know how Cersei Lannister holds power, fear, intimidation, manipulation. She is regent in all but name, and the future of the throne is precarious. Tommen is young and easily swayed. If left unchecked, his mother will rule through him for years. This cannot continue." The steward stepped forward. "What would you have us do? If you want war, we've none to wage. The Tyrells may bring swords, but that could send the city into an uproar." Margaery shook her head. "We do not want war. The entire point is that we must do this in secret without raising an army or spilling the blood of thousands. We want Cersei unseated by her own missteps. In short, we want to engineer the circumstances under which she must yield." Leonette spoke next. "The Queen Mother is paranoid. She sees threats in every shadow. If we can exploit that, perhaps push her to do something rash that erodes her support. She has power only as long as the lords and the common folk fear her," said the merchant's son, frowning. "She is gold from the Lannisters, but we all know the crown is deeply in debt. Her reputation is already tarnished. The people remember the rumors about her and her brother, the walk of atonement she endured when the faith took her. She's clung to power through cunning and a mixture of alliances with those who hate her but fear her retribution more." Sansa spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "If we are to do this, we must be cautious. She must be blindsided, made to realize, too late, that she is alone. No swords drawn, only the threat of them if she refuses to step down. If House Tyrell withdraws its support, if the city's merchants withdraw their backing, if even her own Lannister allies begin to doubt her, she'll have nowhere to stand." Ser Tallad offered a wry smile. "A bloodless coup, that is what you want?" "That or as close to it as we can manage," said Margaery. "We do not want another war. That's the only reason we risk all of this." Sansa nodded, feeling her courage rise. She recalled her father's devotion to justice, how he had abhorred the notion of more bloodshed. If only he had known that such a route might exist, perhaps fate would have been kinder. But the wheel was turning now, and she might find a measure of redemption by doing what she could to protect the realm from another outbreak of violence. They conferred late into the night. Plans were laid out with careful detail. Each person would have a part to play, gathering information, swaying the opinions of knights, merchants, and perhaps most crucially, certain faith leaders who might speak against Cersei. Margaery would pretend to maintain her docile acceptance as Tommen's widow, though the truth was more complex, as her marriage had never been consummated. And Sansa would wear the mask of a quiet lady, still under the watchful eye of the crown. Quietly, they would sow the seeds of discontent. Cersei's loyalty among the King's Guard would be tested, for not all of them admired her methods. Rumors would be stirred that the Iron Bank of Bravos might call in debts. that the alliances with the Westerlands were fraying. All of it was delicate. A single misstep could bring the whole conspiracy to light, and heads would roll. Yet as Sansa left that secret meeting, her heart pounded with a new sense of purpose. For once, she was not at the mercy of others' schemes. She was a participant, a co-architect, in what might be a grand strategy to finally end the tyranny that had cost her so much. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing seemed to move as it always did, with a facade of normalcy. The markets bustled, the Red Keep thrummed with the day-to-day affairs of the court, and Cersei Lannister paced the halls with haughty disdain. But beneath the surface, a quiet subversion was unfolding. Agents of House Tyrell mingled with traitors, listening for any sign of discontent. The steward Margaery trusted slipped honeyed words into the ears of lesser courtiers, spreading subtle rumors that Cersei was negotiating new taxes which would cripple the merchants. A few local septas, loyal to the memory of Margaery's charitable works, began to question aloud whether the crown truly served the Seven, or if it served the vanity of one woman alone. In her daily life, Sansa maintained a quiet presence at court functions she was obligated to attend. She wore the Stark sigil with a muted pride, never flaunting it, yet never letting anyone forget who she was. She spoke little in public, playing the role of a meek observer. Whenever Cersei's gaze fell upon her, Sansa dropped her eyes demurely. Inside, however, she recorded every detail she could glean. Who was meeting with whom, which lords complained about the Queen Mother, which ladies whispered behind her back. At night, she would sometimes slip down to that hidden room in the Red Keep or ride out in disguise to the old stable, where the secret council would exchange the latest tidings. Margaery, too, danced her part flawlessly. She maintained a veneer of sorrow tinged with acceptance, as though she had resigned herself to the will of the crown after losing 2 husbands in quick succession. Her grandmother, the fabled Queen of Thorns, had returned briefly to Highgarden to look after urgent family matters, or so the official story went. In truth, Lady Olenna was quietly mobilizing Tyrell bannermen to take no official action but prepare for the day when their support, or lack thereof, might tip the balance in the capital. Weeks lengthened into months. Sansa grew more confident in their plan, though apprehension remained a constant companion. She had once believed that cunning was not her strong suit. She had yearned to be like the heroes of the songs, where truth and bravery were enough. The real world had taught her otherwise. Now she found herself weaving half-truths, dropping cautious hints to men of influence, leaning on the courtesy taught her by Septa Mordain to charm and disarm. She did not enjoy the deception, but she recognized its necessity. It was, in its own way, a new kind of armor. Though Sansa did not meet with Margaery every day, their paths often crossed at courtly events, or in the sept, or sometimes by chance in the corridors. They would exchange the faintest glances, a flicker of acknowledgement enough to confirm the alliance remained strong, but never enough to rouse suspicion from watchful eyes. Sansa found herself cherishing those small moments. She recalled being a lonely girl once, dreaming of courtly love and ladies' confidences. It was a strange, bittersweet comfort to find genuine partnership in Margaery, even if it was born of necessity and a shared danger. She felt less alone in her fight. The night came when everything began to shift. It was a quiet evening, the sky dark with thick clouds that promised rain. Sansa was in her chamber, reading by the flicker of candles, when a knock rattled her door. Her maid poked her head in, looking pale. "My lady, a messenger from Lady Margaery." "Urgent." Sansa set aside her book, heart pounding. "Bring them in." The messenger was a small boy with brown hair and a face smudged with dust. She recognized him as one of the orphans Margaery had taken under her wing at the Baelor's September after the war, a clever child who ran errands around the city. He stepped forward and bowed awkwardly. "My Lady Sansa, milady told me to give you this." He handed her a folded scrap of parchment sealed with Margaery's personal crest, a rose entwined with the Tyrell sigil. Sansa broke the seal, scanning the few scribbled lines. Her breath caught in her throat. Lady Olenna had arrived unexpectedly at the city's gates this evening, escorted by a small retinue of Tyrell guards. A meeting was to be held at once in the old stable. "Thank you," Sansa told the boy, forcing a smile. "Wait in the kitchens, get yourself some food and a bed for the night if you need. I'll have word to send you back once I've readied." The boy nodded, clearly relieved, and left. Sansa's mind whirled. For Lady Olenna to show up unannounced meant something serious was afoot. She knew the risk. If Cersei learned Olenna Tyrell was in the city, questions would be asked immediately. The Queen of Thorns was no friend to the Lannisters, and her presence at this hour could not be dismissed as a mere visit. Still, Sansa could not ignore the summons. She hurried to change her gown for a plainer cloak and boots, tying her hair back in a simple braid that would be less recognizable. With her hood drawn, she slipped out of the Red Keep, praying to the old gods and knew that no prying eyes took note of her. The sky was heavier than ever, and the first droplets of rain started to fall as she made her way through the winding streets. She clung to the shadows, passing a few gold cloaks who were too busy with their own concerns to stop her. By the time she reached the stable, her cloak was damp and the wind carried the promise of a storm. Inside, she found Margaery, Leonette, and a cluster of Tyrell guards all gathered around a single lantern. And there, seated on a barrel with her walking stick in hand, was Olenna Tyrell, the fabled Queen of Thorns herself. Sansa made a small curtsy. "Lady Olenna." Olenna wasted no time. "Good, you're here? Now we can get on with this nonsense." Her bright eyes flicked over Sansa. "You look well, child. Or as well as one can look in this pit of vipers. Now, let's get to it." Margaery looked around, face taut. "Has Ser Talad arrived yet?" "No," said Leonette, her voice subdued. "He was supposed to come, but we've had no sign of him or the steward." Olenna tapped her cane on the floor in irritation. "Hurry up, girl, spit out what's so urgent. My time is precious, and this city grows more dangerous by the moment." Margaery let out a slow breath. "Grandmother, as you know, we have been quietly gathering supporters. The plan was to wait until we had enough pressure on Cersei, enough that she'd be forced to either step aside or face a united front. We've sown many seeds, but I fear something has changed. We received word that Cersei has begun to suspect that House Tyrell is plotting. She's reached out to certain lords and offered them positions of influence in exchange for loyalty. She's investigating the finances of anyone connected to us." Olenna scowled. "That woman has a nose for treachery. She never sees her own reflection in the mirror, but she'll sniff out any threat to her power. So you think we must act sooner than planned?" Margaery nodded, then looked at Sansa. "We do. The talk among the small folk is that another tax might be imposed to pay off the crown's debts. This is our opportunity. If word spreads that Cersei Lannister will raise taxes on bread and flour, the city will explode in anger. But if we are ready to step in to show the people a better way..." Sansa's eyes widened. "A riot in the city would be dangerous. People could be hurt. Is that what we want?" Olenna gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "The threat of a riot is often more effective than an actual riot. We must be prepared to strike. We arrange for certain shop owners and bakers to close their doors in protest. The common folk will see their daily bread vanish. Rumors will swirl that this is Cersei's doing, punishing them to fill her coffers and pay her debts. Tensions will rise. Then we step in with a solution, offering to keep the city fed if Cersei relinquishes her iron grip. The Tyrells have the harvests, after all. But will that truly make her relinquish power?" Sansa asked, unease creeping in. "Cersei is proud. She might decide to set the gold cloaks on the crowds, kill a few to terrify the rest." Margaery's brow furrowed. "That's why we must ensure the gold cloaks are on our side before it escalates." She looked to the Tyrell guardsmen. "Have you made progress in swaying the city watch?" One of them, a broad-shouldered knight named Ser Godfrey, nodded. "Many of the watch are from common backgrounds, men whose families can barely afford to eat. A few well-placed bribes and promises of better pay or at least stable bread prices can do wonders. Not all, but enough that if trouble starts, they won't just butcher innocent people on Cersei's orders." Leonette added, "We only need them to hesitate, not necessarily to march on the Red Keep. As soon as the threat of violence turns against her, Cersei will realize she stands alone. We want her to see that the city itself will not obey her. Then we give her an ultimatum, step down or face an uprising." A hush fell. Sansa felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. This was more than she had initially imagined. The plan had been to quietly undermine Cersei's power, isolate her, and make a bloodless transition possible. Brown hair and a face smudged with dust. She recognized him as one of the orphans Margaery had taken under her wing at the Baelor September after the war, a clever child who ran errands around the city. He stepped forward and bowed awkwardly. "My Lady Sansa, milady told me to give you this." He handed her a folded scrap of parchment sealed with Margaery's personal crest, a rose entwined with the Tyrell sigil. Sansa broke the seal, scanning the few scribbled lines. Her breath caught in her throat. Lady Olenna had arrived unexpectedly at the city's gates this evening, escorted by a small retinue of Tyrell guards. A meeting was to be held at once in the old stable. "Thank you," Sansa told the boy, forcing a smile. "Wait in the kitchens, get yourself some food and a bed for the night if you need. I'll have word to send you back once I've readied." The boy nodded, clearly relieved, and left. Sansa's mind whirled. For Lady Olenna to show up unannounced meant something serious was afoot. She knew the risk. If Cersei learned Olenna Tyrell was in the city, questions would be asked immediately. The Queen of Thorns was no friend to the Lannisters, and her presence at this hour could not be dismissed as a mere visit. Still, Sansa could not ignore the summons. She hurried to change her gown for a plainer cloak and boots, tying her hair back in a simple braid that would be less recognizable. With her hood drawn, she slipped out of the Red Keep, praying to the old gods and knew that no prying eyes took note of her. The sky was heavier than ever, and the first droplets of rain started to fall as she made her way through the winding streets. She clung to the shadows, passing a few gold cloaks who were too busy with their own concerns to stop her. By the time she reached the stable, her cloak was damp and the wind carried the promise of a storm. Inside, she found Margaery, Leonette, and a cluster of Tyrell guards all gathered around a single lantern. And there, seated on a barrel with her walking stick in hand, was Olenna Tyrell, the fabled Queen of Thorns herself. Sansa made a small curtsy. "Lady Olenna." Olenna wasted no time. "Good you're here? Now we can get on with this nonsense." Her bright eyes flicked over Sansa. "You look well, child. Or as well as one can look in this pit of vipers. Now, let's get to it." Margaery looked around, face taut. "Has Ser Talad arrived yet?" "No," said Leonette, her voice subdued. "He was supposed to come, but we've had no sign of him or the steward." Olenna tapped her cane on the floor in irritation. "Hurry up, girl, spit out what's so urgent. My time is precious, and this city grows more dangerous by the moment." Margaery let out a slow breath. "Grandmother, as you know, we have been quietly gathering supporters. The plan was to wait until we had enough pressure on Cersei, enough that she'd be forced to either step aside or face a united front. We've sown many seeds, but I fear something has changed. We received word that Cersei has begun to suspect that House Tyrell is plotting. She's reached out to certain lords and offered them positions of influence in exchange for loyalty. She's investigating the finances of anyone connected to us." Olenna scowled. "That woman has a nose for treachery. She never sees her own reflection in the mirror, but she'll sniff out any threat to her power. So you think we must act sooner than planned?" Margaery nodded, then looked at Sansa. "We do. The talk among the small folk is that another tax might be imposed to pay off the crown's debts. This is our opportunity. If word spreads that Cersei Lannister will raise taxes on bread and flour, the city will explode in anger. But if we are ready to step in to show the people a better way..." Sansa's eyes widened. "A riot in the city would be dangerous. People could be hurt. Is that what we want?" Olenna gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "The threat of a riot is often more effective than an actual riot. We must be prepared to strike. We arrange for certain shop owners and bakers to close their doors in protest. The common folk will see their daily bread vanish. Rumors will swirl that this is Cersei's doing, punishing them to fill her coffers and pay her debts. Tensions will rise. Then we step in with a solution, offering to keep the city fed if Cersei relinquishes her iron grip. The Tyrells have the harvests after all. But will that truly make her relinquish power?" Sansa asked, unease creeping in. "Cersei is proud. She might decide to set the gold cloaks on the crowds, kill a few to terrify the rest." Margaery's brow furrowed. "That's why we must ensure the gold cloaks are on our side before it escalates." She looked to the Tyrell guardsmen. "Have you made progress in swaying the city watch?" One of them, a broad-shouldered knight named Ser Godfrey, nodded. "Many of the watch are from common backgrounds, men whose families can barely afford to eat. A few well-placed bribes and promises of better pay or at least stable bread prices can do wonders. Not all, but enough that if trouble starts, they won't just butcher innocent people on Cersei's orders." Leonette added, "We only need them to hesitate, not necessarily to march on the Red Keep. As soon as the threat of violence turns against her, Cersei will realize she stands alone. We want her to see that the city itself will not obey her. Then we give her an ultimatum, step down or face an uprising." A hush fell. Sansa felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. This was more than she had initially imagined. The plan had been to quietly undermine Cersei's power, isolate her, and make a bloodless transition possible. Yet the threat of violence hung in the air more starkly than ever. This was the game they played. Was there a truly gentle way to unseat a lioness protecting her cub? Olenna tapped her cane again. "Well, child," she addressed Sansa, "you're the Stark girl in this equation. The North still carries weight in many hearts. Once, your father was beloved by the people as the hand of the king. Are you willing to do your part when the time comes? If you hesitate, you'll risk all of us. We need you." Sansa swallowed, recalling her father's execution, how the crowd had both jeered and watched with some pity as he was killed. She remembered looking out over the throng of faces, feeling utterly alone. Now she had a chance to turn that same crowd against the very woman who orchestrated so much grief. She felt the old terror claw at her, but also a new sense of resolve. "Yes," she said, meeting Olenna's eyes. "When the moment comes, I'll do what I must." Margaery reached out, briefly squeezing Sansa's hand in thanks. "We should move swiftly," she said, looking around at those gathered. "Within days, word of a new tax will break, and we'll do our part to fan the flames. All we need is to spark that final wave of anger. Then we reveal ourselves as the protectors of the people." The meeting ended soon after. The thunder rumbled in the distance as each departed in careful intervals so as not to arouse suspicion of a large gathering. Sansa waited until she was the last aside from Olenna and Margaery, who lingered to review details with their guards. Before Sansa left, Olenna caught her by the arm. "You're braver than you think, child," she said in a low voice. "Starks usually are. Don't let fear stop you now." Sansa managed a tight nod. Her heart hammered in her chest as she ventured back into the winding streets, the storm in full force by now. She clutched her cloak around her, letting the rain pelt her hood as she made her way to the Red Keep. On reaching the gates, she entered quietly and slipped up to her chamber without attracting undue attention. Yet, as she unfastened her soaked cloak, she realized she was trembling from more than just the cold. She thought of the chaos that might unfold in a matter of days. Were they truly forging a path to peace, or only lighting a fuse that could explode into another catastrophe? The next morning dawned gray and cheerless, as though the sky itself brooded over the city. Sansa was called to a small council meeting in the presence of Cersei, which immediately set her nerves on edge. Usually, she was not summoned unless it involved some public display or ceremonial function. Why now? She dressed carefully in a modest gown, pinned back her hair, and made her way to the council chambers. Entering, she saw that along with Cersei, Grand Maester Pycelle was present, as well as a smattering of lesser courtiers. Margaery was there too, standing at a polite distance from the Queen Mother. Cersei regarded Sansa with a look that might have been mistaken for casual disinterest by anyone who didn't know her. But Sansa knew better. Behind those green eyes lurked a viper's suspicion. "Lady Sansa," Cersei said icily, "thank you for joining us. I trust you slept well during last night's storm." Sansa curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace. It was a bit loud, but I found rest eventually." "Indeed," Cersei murmured, then cast her gaze around. "It seems that yet another crisis befalls the capital. Our finances are pressed, and the Iron Bank is demanding repayment sooner than expected. The cost of feeding this wretched city and the demands of the armies that keep us safe grow ever higher." She paused to let her meaning sink in. "We may have no choice but to raise certain taxes." A ripple of uneasy shifting passed through the courtiers. Margaery dipped her head demurely, as though absorbing the information. "Your Grace, might I ask which taxes you plan to raise?" Cersei's lip curled faintly. "On certain staple goods. Bread, flour, perhaps ale. Pittance, really, but it will help fill the royal coffers. I'm sure the small folk will grumble, yet they will comply. They always do." Sansa's heart hammered. This was precisely the opportunity, no, the fuse for their plan. She forced her face to remain neutral. "It will surely be a temporary measure," she said softly, "to see the crown through these troubling times." "Of course," Cersei nodded, as though that were obvious. "And those who serve the realm loyally will have nothing to fear. But I have been informed there are some in the city who might seek to incite trouble, to exploit the commoners' unrest for their own gain." Her gaze swept the room, pausing a fraction of a second too long on Margaery and then on Sansa. "Let me be perfectly clear. Any attempt to undermine the crown will be met with swift, merciless justice." The tension in the chamber rose. Margaery lowered her eyes, her posture that of a meek court lady. "No one wishes that," she said quietly. "We all serve the crown, Your Grace." Sansa was sure her cheeks had lost color. She managed to speak as well, echoing Margaery's sentiment. Cersei watched them both like a cat poised at a mouse hole, then flicked her wrist in a gesture of dismissal. "You are excused," she said. "I must speak with the others on logistics." Sansa curtsied again and walked out beside Margaery, neither speaking until they were well away from the council chambers. When they turned a corner and found a relatively deserted hallway, Margaery let out a shaky breath. She suspects something. She does, Sansa agreed, voice quavering. We must be careful. They parted ways soon after, each returning to the roles they had to play. Sansa spent the day in a haze of anxiety, her mind churning with every detail that might indicate Cersei was ready to pounce. She took her noon meal in her chambers, worried that prying eyes might see something in her face if she dined in the Great Hall. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. By dusk, word had already spread through the city. New taxes on bread and flour would begin next week. At first, the news was taken with weary resignation. King's Landing was no stranger to burdensome levies. But as the secret council knew, the seeds of discontent were already sown. The rumor Margaery's network spread was that the taxes would not be a mere copper more, but double or triple, punishing those who could least afford it. Shop owners and bakers were whispered to be complicit, or else they, too, would face ruin. Grumblings grew. And though no open protest erupted that evening, the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. On the third day after the announcement, the city awoke to find that nearly every baker in King's Landing had closed shop in apparent protest or possibly out of fear for their own livelihoods, as the rumor said. Lines of hungry people gathered at the shuttered doors. No bread, no pastries, even the lesser flat cakes were unavailable. And the few who did remain open charged an exorbitant price, citing the soon-to-be-imposed tax. The gold cloaks were dispatched to quell any unrest, patrolling in tense formations. Sansa watched from a high balcony as a group of hungry small folk shouted angrily at the closed shutters of a bakery. A wave of guilt swept her. She never wanted to see them suffer. But Margaery had assured the council that once the outcry reached its crescendo, they would step forward with wagons of Tyrell grain, offering bread free of the new taxes for a time at least. That was the moment they would demand that the Queen Mother stand aside. It felt like balancing on a knife's edge. The city was a tinderbox. One spark too strong and the flames would tear through King's Landing. But if they played it right, the looming threat of an uncontrolled riot would be enough to make Cersei capitulate. That afternoon, Sansa slipped out to the stable, heart pounding with the knowledge that this might be the final meeting before they made their move. She arrived to find only Margaery there at first, pacing anxiously across the straw-strewn floor. Outside, the sky was bleak again, heavy clouds threatening another storm. Margaery turned when Sansa entered, tension etched on her features. Where's everyone else? Sansa's stomach twisted with apprehension. I don't know. Did Lady Olenna not come? No, Margaery said in a clipped tone, and Ser Talad is missing as well. They exchanged worried looks. Pairs. The crowd tensed, some stepping back in fear. Sansa's stomach clenched. This was the moment of truth. The sergeant leading the gold cloaks barked an order. Cease this distribution at once. By command of the Queen Mother, all unlicensed distribution is to be halted. Hand over the wagons. Sansa's heart slammed in her chest. She glanced at Margaery, who wore a steady composure, though her eyes flashed with anxiety. Margaery stepped forward, raising her voice so that all could hear. We bring food for the people. Does the Queen Mother want to starve her own city even as she taxes them into the gutter? The sergeant scowled, clearly uncertain how to respond to that in front of so many. Then he rallied. The Queen Mother maintains order. None can give out mass goods without crown permission. A roar of disapproval rose from the crowd. Some jeered, brandishing the loaves they had already received. The tension crackled. Sansa felt the atmosphere grow feverish, the threat of violence a hair's breadth away. Would the gold cloaks strike them down? Had the bribes been insufficient? From among the ranks of the watchmen stepped another officer. Sansa recognized him as a captain known to be sympathetic to the Tyrell cause. He stared down the sergeant, then spoke loudly. The city is starving. If these fine ladies bring bread, are we to refuse it because of some arbitrary tax? We swore an oath to protect the people. An uncertain hush fell. The sergeant bristled, but it was clear that half the men behind him were nodding in agreement with the captain. The other half looked uneasy, glancing around at the increasingly angry crowd. A single spark could ignite it all into chaos. The sergeant, his face reddening, tried to bluster. We take orders from the Queen Mother. Another watchman cut him off. We take orders from the king, he said, and the king wants his people fed, does he not? The crowd cheered. The sergeant fumed, but he could see he was outnumbered by both his own men and the throng. At last, he gave a disgusted snarl and turned on his heel, leading away those few who remained staunchly loyal to Cersei. The rest stood guard around the wagons, not to impede distribution, but to keep order among the crowd. Relief flooded Sansa so powerfully that she nearly swayed on her feet. Margaery caught her elbow, whispering, "We must press on now, before Cersei has time to regroup." Sansa nodded. This was their moment of advantage. The show of defiance had succeeded. They had effectively declared themselves in opposition to Cersei's authority. With the crowd chanting gratitude for House Tyrell and for the Northern Lady by Margaery's side, they began moving toward the Red Keep, wagons still distributing bread as they went. More and more people joined the procession, a wave of the hungry and the hopeful chanting curses against the Queen Mother's taxes. Sansa's mind whirled at the sight. She had seen horrifying mobs in King's Landing before, but this energy felt different. It was still dangerous, chaotic, but there was an undercurrent of hope. She prayed it would remain that way. As they neared the Red Keep's imposing gates, they found them barred, lines of Lannister guards arrayed outside. The captain from the Gold Cloaks conferred briefly with Margaery's guards. Then, with a resolute nod, he marched to the gates and shouted, "In the name of King Tommen, open these gates. Lady Margaery Tyrell and Lady Sansa Stark have come to speak with the king." A tense silence. Then, above the battlements, a figure appeared. It was Qyburn, the Queen Mother's current master of whisperers, peering down with a sneer. "The keep is closed to traitors and rabble," he called out. "Disperse or face the consequences." That inflamed the crowd. Shouts of anger rose, fists pounded the air, and some hurled insults at Qyburn. Sansa's breath caught. If the next step was violence, it would not be the simple overthrow they had hoped for. She looked to Margaery, whose jaw tightened. "We are here to see Cersei step aside. We will not go quietly," Margaery said under her breath, loud enough for the watchers on the walls to hear. At that moment, the gates slowly opened, just wide enough for another figure to emerge. To Sansa's shock, it was Tommen himself, flanked by 2 Kingsguard knights. He looked anxious, his face pale. Sansa felt a pang of sympathy for the boy king, a child placed in an impossible position. Behind him stood Cersei, her expression tight with fury. Nonetheless, she let Tommen step forward as though to shield her from the crowd's direct ire. "Stop this," Tommen shouted, his voice trembling. "Lady Margaery, what are you doing?" Margaery moved ahead. "I'm feeding the people, Your Grace," she said, voice strong enough to carry. "They are hungry because your mother wants to raise taxes to pay debts instead of caring for them. Please let us come inside so we might speak. We do not wish violence, nor do the people, but they must be heard." Tommen looked at the throngs behind her, uncertain. Cersei stepped up beside him, eyes cold as ice. "These are rebels. If you let them in, you sign your own downfall. They want your crown, Tommen. They want to see you undone." She was shouting so all could hear, her voice twisted with anger. The crowd responded with jeers and curses. Some even threw debris at the walls. Tension flared again. Then something unexpected happened. One of the Kingsguard knights beside Tommen removed his helm. Sansa recognized him as Ser Lancel Lannister, once Cersei's cousin and pawn, though he'd broken with her for a time when he joined the faith. Now he looked torn. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "if we do not let them in, we risk the city burning. Listen to what they have to say." Tommen's eyes flicked from Lancel to Margaery, then back to Cersei. The boy's face contorted with indecision. Then he raised a trembling hand. "Let them in," he ordered. Cersei, aghast, hissed something at Tommen, but the boy gave a small shake of his head. The guards at the gate hesitated, looking to Cersei. She met their gaze with open fury, but Tommen repeated his command, more loudly this time. "Open the gate," I said. A hush spread through the crowd. The Queen Mother's face was a mask of rage and fear. Slowly, the massive gates groaned open. The throng, led by Margaery and Sansa, began to move inside. Sansa felt her heart thunder. Was this truly happening? She looked up at the battlements, expecting a hail of arrows, but none came. The Gold Cloaks stationed there lowered their bows, uncertain of which orders to follow. The tension was immense, but the wave of momentum carried the crowd through. They were inside the Red Keep's courtyard, the seat of power in King's Landing. There, Margaery's men formed a protective cordon around the wagons, still doling out bread to those who asked. Cersei was livid, her face drained of color, but she was outnumbered. The lines of Lannister men in the courtyard stood uncertainly, aware that the crowd was far too large to quell. The gold cloaks under Tyrell's sway had joined the march, and not a few commoners had turned up with makeshift weapons, pitchforks, clubs, anything they could carry. This was an army of the poor, not a trained force, but the potential for destruction was vast. None of this was the tidy, controlled scenario Sansa had envisioned. But the confrontation was upon them. Margaery advanced, head held high. "Your Grace," she said to Tommen, "I beg your forgiveness for the boldness of this demonstration, but we cannot stand idle while your mother imposes cruel taxes that will starve the people. We ask for an end to her regency and the establishment of a new council, one that respects the will of the realm." Cersei's laugh was bitter and sharp, echoing across the courtyard. "You think you can force the king's own mother to step aside by parading half the slums into his home? This is treason. The punishment is death." The crowd stirred ominously at that threat, but Margaery raised a hand, calming them. "We do not wish any violence," she said, voice resounding. "We only demand that justice be done. Let it be known. If the king chooses to keep his mother as regent, then the people will starve and revolt. If he removes her, we stand ready to provide for the city with Tyrell grain until the harvest. This is the only way to spare the realm another bloody war." Cersei moved forward, her gold hair glinting in the torchlight, standing mere paces from Margaery. Sansa could see the loathing in her eyes. "You dare speak to me of justice? You killed my son Joffrey," she spat. "And you," her gaze snapped to Sansa, "the daughter of traitors, conspiring with the Tyrells to bring chaos to my gates. The both of you are vile, cunning. Not even your father." Tommen interjected, voice trembling with a desperate note. "Mother, stop." He looked around, seeing the faces of the hungry people, the uneasy watchmen, the Tyrell guards with their wagon loads of bread. Tears stood in his eyes. Enough blood has been spilled in these wars. Enough. Please, I don't want my city to burn. I don't want my people to suffer. Margaery is right. We must find peace. Cersei turned on him. "You foolish boy. They've bewitched you. The city is ours. The throne is ours." Tommen paled, shifting back. One of the king's guards stepped between him and Cersei, as though to shield the king from her fury. A hush fell over the courtyard, everyone feeling the precarious balance. Sansa, summoning her courage, stepped forward. Her voice wavered slightly, but she spoke clearly. "Your Grace, my father died believing in the rule of law. He served your husband, King Robert, faithfully. Let us not make King's Landing a graveyard for more noble families. If you allow a new council, if you free the city from these harsh measures, the realm can heal." Cersei snarled. "You think you can play the sweet lady and trick us all, Sansa Stark? I see through you." But the crowd murmured behind Sansa's words. Hungry men and women who had seen too many lords who cared nothing for them. They heard something new in the voices of Margaery Tyrell and Sansa Stark. A promise of reprieve, of mercy. It resonated more powerfully than Cersei's threats. The gold cloaks shifted, uneasy. They, too, didn't want to face a mob that would fight to the death. And the Lannister men seemed to sense that Tommen was uncertain, that the tide might not favor them if swords were drawn. Margaery seized that moment. "Your Grace," she addressed Tommen, "it is in your power to end this conflict now. We ask that you dismiss your mother from the regency. Let her retire with dignity, away from the capital if she so chooses. Form a council that includes voices from other great houses, and from the faith if you will, and let the people see that you rule for them, not to enrich a single house." Cersei looked near apoplexy. "How dare you?" Tommen's voice, surprisingly firm, cut her off. "I will do it," he said, staring at Margaery, then at the mass of people. "I, King Tommen of the House Baratheon, do hereby release my mother, Cersei Lannister, from her duties as regent. She will no longer have power over the royal household or the governance of King's Landing." A roar of approval went up from the crowd, though Sansa could hear Cersei's shrill shriek of outrage. She tried to lunge forward, but the Kingsguard, Lancel among them, stepped in her path, restraining her. Sansa almost pitied her in that moment, seeing the downfall of a proud, vengeful woman undone by her own disregard for the people's suffering. The victory in that instant was fragile as spun glass. They had forced Cersei's removal without a drop of blood spilled so far, but much remained uncertain. Would Cersei accept her humiliating defeat, or would she lash out? Would the Lannister forces in the city remain obedient to Tommen's new order? Could the realm truly find peace under a child king guided by a broader council? Sansa stood with Margaery at the center of the courtyard, the crowd around them cheering. She felt the unsteady beating of her own heart, the swirl of relief and anxiety, but also a dawning sense of triumph. They had done it. They had orchestrated a peaceful overthrow of the most dangerous woman in Westeros. In that moment, as thunder rumbled overhead, Sansa recalled how powerless she had once been, a frightened girl in a gilded cage. Now she was an actor in the realm's fate, forging alliances to end a cycle of bloodshed. She felt tears threaten, but they were tears of release. The next hours passed in a blur. Tommen retreated with Margaery and Sansa to the Red Keep's throne room, a handful of courtiers and guards trailing behind. There, in the grand space lit by torches and thick with tension, the Boy King repeated his decree, adding that a new small council would be formed immediately. Margaery was to take a seat among them, and the High Septon was to be invited as well. Sansa's presence was affirmed as a representative of the North, though that wording was awkward. She had no official title beyond Lady of Winterfell in name, as the Boltons were technically in power there. Still, the symbolism was potent. Cersei was not present to hear this final pronouncement. She had been escorted away, under guard, to her chambers, where she was effectively placed under house arrest until the city's mood stabilized. The fearsome Ser Robert Strong, her silent, giant protector, was suspiciously absent, perhaps off dealing with some other matter. Still, the day belonged to the Secret Council's careful planning. When at last the formalities were settled, Margaery and Sansa stepped out into the courtyard again. The wagons of bread had long since been emptied, and the gathered crowd was dispersing, many carrying fresh loaves home to their families. A wave of weary relief washed over Sansa at the sight of families reunited with simple nourishment. Some even knelt to thank her or Margaery. Sansa blushed at the attention, though she felt a warmth in her chest at their gratitude. Amid the lingering onlookers, Olenna Tyrell finally appeared, accompanied by her retinue. She eyed Sansa with a mixture of faint approval and her usual biting wit. "Well, child, you've helped pull off the greatest bit of brazen subterfuge I've seen in years. Not quite how we planned, messy, chaotic, with far too many unknowns, but here we are." She nodded curtly. "Nicely done. Now the real work begins." Sansa nodded, exhaustion settling on her like a heavy cloak. "Yes," she managed. "We must ensure Tommen truly rules fairly, that the people aren't left to starve again." Olenna snorted. "That's Margaery's purview now. She'll have her hands full." Then, more gently, she added, "You should get some rest. War leaves scars even when no blood is spilled." Sansa forced a small smile. "Thank you, my lady." She felt the day's tension pressing down on her. She longed for a moment of quiet, a chance to close her eyes and remember that there was more to life than intrigue and fear. She yearned, too, for the north, for the crisp air and the howling winds of Winterfell. Perhaps one day she would return there, but first she had to ensure that the city she once hated was safe from further tyranny. Margaery approached then, her expression weary but triumphant. She slipped her arm through Sansa's and led her aside. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of everything that had passed. "No war. No rivers of blood. We forced her out." Tears stung Sansa's eyes. "Yes, we did," she whispered. They stood together, two survivors of countless schemes, two women who had learned the cost of living in a world ruled by men's swords and ambition. They had formed a secret council and enacted a plan that, against all odds, had unseated Cersei Lannister without plunging the realm into another war. There would be repercussions, of course. Factions loyal to Cersei might yet rise, and the politics of King's Landing would remain a viper's nest. But in that moment, there was a hush across the Red Keep, as if a new wind had swept through the corridors and dungeons, carrying away the stale fear that had clung there for too long. In the days that followed, the city remained tense, but no open conflict erupted. Tommen issued a decree lowering taxes on basic staples, aided by the Tyrell shipments of grain. The small folk cheered, praising Queen Margaery, though she and Tommen were not formally married at this point. Some even sang songs of the northern she-wolf who had come to feed the city, though Sansa shied away from such praise. If anything, she felt the weight of responsibility. The secret council still met discreetly to discuss the transition, ensuring that any Lannister loyalists who might conspire to bring Cersei back to power were swiftly dissuaded or neutralized. Cersei herself was forcibly taken back to Casterly Rock shortly thereafter, stripped of her regency, though she still carried the title of Queen Mother. A small escort of loyal Lannister men accompanied her, but she was no longer free to command the realm as she saw fit. She left the capital with a poisonous glare, promising vengeance. But for the moment, her claws were trimmed and her roar fell on unsympathetic ears. Peace reigned in King's Landing, an uneasy, fragile peace, but peace all the same. The garrison was no longer wholly commanded by Lannister men, and the Gold Cloaks came under the official authority of the reorganized Small Council, with Margaery effectively at its head. The bread distribution continued for several weeks, ensuring the people did not go hungry while the capital's market stabilized. Tyrell coin and resources lubricated the process. For all her cunning, Margaery had a sincere desire to rule well and kindly, having learned from her grandmother that generosity bred loyalty faster than cruelty bred fear. Sansa, for her part, found a new role in the city, an intermediary for the North, which was still locked in its own turmoil. She sent ravens to Winterfell, uncertain of what news would return, if any. She wrote to her half-brother Jon on the Wall, trying to persuade him to come south for a meeting about forging alliances that could stave off any future conflicts. Whether any of that would bear fruit, she did not know. But she refused to remain idle. She had learned, at last, that power was not something she had to watch from the sidelines. She could claim her voice and wield it for good. One evening, as she walked through the gardens of the Red Keep, those same lemon groves where she had once found only fear, she encountered Margaery. They strolled quietly amid the foliage, the warm breezes rustling the leaves. The city lights glowed beyond the walls, a reminder that 1,000 flickering candles of hope had replaced the threat of torches brandished in anger. "Do you ever wonder," Sansa said softly, "what might have happened if we hadn't taken this chance? If we'd let things remain as they were?" Margaery tilted her head. "We would have remained pawns, I suppose, dancing to the tune of lords and ladies more ruthless than we. And the city might eventually have burned anyway with some new war or riot. Perhaps that is Cersei's way." Sansa breathed in the night air. "We did something good," she said. "I only hope it lasts. The realm doesn't have the best track record of lasting peace." A rueful smile touched Margaery's lips. "We'll do our best to make it last. War is too often the easy recourse of those who hold swords. Peace takes more cunning, more resolve. But I believe we have both in abundance, you and I." Sansa thought of how far she had come, the frightened girl who once believed in stories of chivalrous knights, the lost child manipulated by Littlefinger. He was not that child anymore. She was a Stark, standing in King's Landing by choice, forging alliances for the good of the realm. "Then let us keep watch over this peace," Sansa said softly. "We have formed our secret council. We've accomplished our first goal. We must ensure that the game doesn't devour us again." Margaery nodded, then looked up at the star-strewn sky. "The game will always go on, I suspect. But at least now we're not just pieces on the board. We've chosen our own moves. And for the sake of all those who need our help, I hope our moves will continue to shape the future." They continued walking in silence, two young women who had wrested power from a deadly adversary without raising an army or unleashing a slaughter. The Red Keep's walls, once so suffocating, now felt marginally less oppressive. The aroma of lemons wafted through the warm night air, and in the flickering torchlight, each step they took seemed to carry them into a new dawn for the city. In the many months that followed, Sansa often revisited the memory of that courtyard confrontation, the moment King Tommen, trembling but resolute, ousted his mother from power. She remembered the hush that fell, the collective intake of breath as people realized no swords would be drawn. A part of her still braced for the day when the balance might shift again, when Cersei or another threat might return with vengeance in mind. But with Margaery beside her and the secret council still quietly operating to root out threats to stability, she had hope. Each day, the city grew calmer, more sure of its leadership. And each day, Sansa found her own voice stronger, tempered by the lessons she had learned. There were times she wrote to her brother Jon, feeling the distance of the North keenly, wishing he could see what she and Margaery had achieved. There were times she pined for Winterfell, for the crisp snows, the wolf's head banners, the simplicity of the northern moors. Yet she knew this was where she was needed. And Margaery reminded her often that unity between the North and the South was essential if they were to maintain a peaceful realm. The Starks and the Tyrells, side by side, might well herald a new era, one where cunning need not always be cruel, and compassion could count for more than force. When Sansa finally did set foot outside the Red Keep on a crisp autumn morning heading for the docks to greet a visiting delegation from the Vale, she caught sight of the city and realized how different it felt from the day she first arrived. A frightened girl in a golden cage. The streets were not perfect, but they bustled with a kind of guarded optimism. Vendors hawked bread, affordable bread, thanks to the watchful eye of the new council. The gold cloaks patrolled more gently under instructions to keep the peace without resorting to cruelty. The seeds of a better future were taking root, however tentatively. And though the city had 1,000 scars, it lived on, forging ahead without the overshadowing presence of Cersei's iron will. She found Margaery at the docks, overseeing the reception of the Vale's envoys. Margaery stood poised and gracious, smiling at the knights disembarking from the ship. Sansa recognized a few sigils, House Royce, House Corbray. Perhaps they too sought to build alliances for a stable realm. As she approached, Margaery glanced over with a warm greeting. "Lady Sansa, so good of you to join us. The Vale Lords have come to see how King's Landing fares under our new arrangements. Let us show them we are strong and united." Sansa drew a breath, remembering all that had passed, all that she had overcome. She stepped to Margaery's side, greeting the Vale Knights with courteous words and a gentle smile, as if this were the most natural role in the world for her. And perhaps it was now. She felt no fear in this moment, only a quiet pride that she was shaping her destiny rather than letting others control it. In the end, that was the triumph she and Margaery Tyrell claimed. They had taken hold of the game in King's Landing and turned it toward the possibility of peace. There would be challenges ahead, betrayals, new threats. But for once, the city was not drenched in the blood of another war. The Iron Throne belonged to a king who might yet learn wisdom under their guidance, and the small folk had not been sacrificed as pawns in another wave of violence. If the days of open conflict returned, Sansa vowed she would face them unflinching, for she was no longer a helpless maiden awaiting rescue. She was a Stark of Winterfell, a conspirator in a quiet revolution, a partner to Margaery Tyrell in a council built not on fear, but on a shared resolve to protect the realm. She carried her past wounds like invisible armor now, and she pressed forward into each new dawn with steady resolve. That night, after the Vale envoys had been received and the formalities seen to, Sansa found herself once more in the gardens with Margaery, drifting among lemon trees beneath a star-filled sky. Music from a distant feast drifted on the soft wind, but neither paid it much mind. They paused at the edge of a fountain, the water catching moonlight like scattered diamonds. "I don't know what the future will hold," Sansa admitted, her voice quiet in the dark. "But if we can keep the peace, that is more than most have managed." Margaery's smile was thoughtful. "I think we can. Together, we managed to pull off the impossible without shedding blood. Perhaps that's a sign that the Seven have not entirely forsaken us." Sansa closed her eyes, hearing in her mind the voices of her family, her father, her mother, Robb, all lost in the storms of war. She let the night's hush wrap around her, comforting in its calm. At length, she opened her eyes again, gazing upon Margaery with a soft, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said, her tone brimming with sincerity. "Thank you for trusting me, for believing we could do this." Margaery shook her head gently. "We believed in each other. That was enough." They stood there side by side, listening to the fountain's tranquil murmur. High above them rose the towers of the Red Keep, no longer so dark and foreboding under Cersei's shadow. Beyond those walls stretched a city learning the meaning of hope, forging a path to a tomorrow less burdened by fear. And in that moment, neither Sansa Stark nor Margaery Tyrell felt powerless any longer. They had stepped out of the long shadows, seized their own destinies, and though the game would never truly end, they had changed its rules, if only for a time, if only by a little. Still, in a land so often torn by war, even that little spark of peaceful revolution felt like a victory worth celebrating. In the quiet that followed their whispered triumph, Sansa Stark lingered by the fountain in the gardens long after Margaery Tyrell retired to her quarters. A faint moon traced silver onto the water, reflecting the shifting shadows of lemon trees overhead. She had never imagined King's Landing in a state of calm like this, all the city's tension momentarily eased as though at the end of a long exhalation. The illusions of safety were fragile, she knew, but for now the courtyard was still and free from screams. The difference was striking. She remembered how she had once stood in these very gardens as a hostage of the Lannisters. The memory clung to her like a nightmarish echo, her fear of Joffrey, her dread of Cersei, the sense that every breath might be her last. Now, in place of terror, there was a new hush threaded with hope. The transformation owed much to the alliance she had forged with Margaery, the quiet revolution that had, against all odds, toppled Cersei Lannister's regency without a drop of blood spilled on that fateful day. Cersei's departure to Casterly Rock had unfolded rapidly, and though the threat of her vengeance remained, the capital had welcomed the sudden relief from her constant demands. The city was not entirely at peace. It was still scarred by fear, riddled with divisions, and haunted by ghosts of the war, but it was closer to peace than Sansa had ever witnessed here. She finally turned away from the fountain, hugging her arms around her body. The warmth of the evening breeze did little to soothe the unsettled quiver in her stomach. Though they had achieved a miracle of sorts, she could not entirely banish her worry that a single misstep could unravel everything. There were so many powers at play: the Tyrell lords who wanted to profit from their new influence, the gold cloaks uncertain of which way the wind was blowing, and Tommen himself, whose youth made him vulnerable to the next cunning manipulator who sought to steal his ear. Sansa was no longer naive enough to believe they had won the game forever. The game continued always. At last, she quietly took her leave of the gardens and walked through the corridors of the Red Keep. In these passages, she recalled the day her father had been marched away, the day the entire realm turned upside down. Every stone in this keep harbored a memory that might wound her if she was not careful. Her footsteps echoed, but no one challenged her presence. No longer a prisoner, she moved without the old dread. Guards recognized her and inclined their heads respectfully. Ladies paused in the corridors to greet her as Lady Sansa. Courtiers, even the ones who had once dismissed her, now sought her notice. The hush gave way to the everyday hum of a castle before bedtime, murmured voices, servants carrying trays, the occasional bark of a hound. She reached her chambers, opened the door onto a cozy space lit by candles. The modestly carved wardrobe, the writing desk where she had been drafting letters, the narrow bed with a thick coverlet, these furnishings seemed meager compared to what a princess or queen might enjoy. But it was still more than she had ever possessed while she was a prisoner. Gratefully, she slipped inside and shut the door. The small hearth glowed with embers, filling the room with a comforting warmth. She shrugged off her cloak and sank onto the bed, letting her tense body relax. An odd swirl of emotions pulled at her. She felt triumph, regret, relief, anticipation, and a current of fear that refused to let her rest. She found herself wishing she could share the day's events with someone she trusted beyond all else, her mother, her father, or even Arya. But her father was gone, her mother and brother as well, and Arya had vanished into the world, location unknown. That left only the tenuous alliances she had forged here. Margaery Tyrell was the closest she had to a confidant, and though Sansa believed in Margaery's good intentions, she remained wary of misplacing her trust. Such caution was the price one paid for surviving King's Landing. Eventually, she undressed, donned a soft shift, and slipped between the sheets. Her mind whirled with the day's memories, the rumble of the crowd, Tommen's trembling voice, Cersei's fury. She wondered how Cersei would plot her revenge from Casterly Rock. But Sansa steadied herself by recalling her vow to never again let fear paralyze her. She was here by choice now, shaping her future. That promise comforted her enough that she drifted into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of Winterfell, snowy battlements, and the wind howling over quiet fields. In the dream, she stood with her mother and father, listening to the wolves in the distance. Then the dream changed to one of lemon trees in a twilit garden, the flicker of torches, and a woman in a golden gown whispering that winter was coming for them all. She woke with a start before dawn, her heart thumping. For a long moment she lay still, listening to the hush of the keep and the dull roar of waves far beyond the city walls. Soon enough, the day would begin, bringing new challenges. With a groan of resignation, she rose, dressed, and pinned her hair back. And so began a new cycle in King's Landing. In the subsequent weeks, the city settled into an uneasy pattern. Margaery, effectively presiding over the small council with Tommen's timid blessing, took pains to keep bread distribution steady and taxes manageable. Food still arrived from the Tyrell storehouses, and even though that generosity could not last forever, it calmed the people enough that the fury of open rebellion faded. The Vale envoys explored deeper alliances, enticed by the notion of a cooperative small council rather than a single tyrant. Lords from the Stormlands, Riverlands, and even the Reach came to the capital to see firsthand what changes were unfolding. Many were cautious. The realm had been burned too often by broken promises and abrupt power shifts. But the calm presence of Margaery Tyrell and the re-emergence of Sansa Stark seemed to reassure some that this was not another rash grab for the throne. Sansa discovered that her voice carried weight in the new order, though it was never explicit. Tommen's regard for her, born partially from pity and partially from a lingering sense that her father had been an honorable man, made him listen to her counsel when she spoke softly in private audiences. Margaery often asked her opinion on how to approach the Northern Lords or the Riverlands. The small council sessions were strange affairs. Half the members were newly appointed, some were Tyrell loyalists, a few were opportunists seeking to line their purses. But they generally bowed to Margaery's calm leadership, which in turn was supported by the combined influence of the Tyrells and, surprisingly, Lancel Lannister, who had remained in the city to represent whatever portion of House Lannister was willing to keep peace. It was a precarious arrangement, but so far no one seemed eager to disrupt the new equilibrium. Sansa spent many long hours drafting letters to northern houses, uncertain if they would reply. The Boltons still held Winterfell by royal decree, she knew, and they would almost certainly not welcome any sign of Stark authority. But that did not stop her from attempting to reach out to the older families, the Manderleys, the Serwins, the Umbers. She wrote politely, explaining that King Tommen had stabilized the capital and that a time for healing was at hand. She invited them to consider sending representatives to King's Landing. She offered no illusions that she could retake Winterfell by words alone, yet she believed bridging the gap might help. Whether they answered was another matter. She imagined those letters traveling across war-scorched roads, carried by uncertain messengers. She knew some might vanish without a trace, lost to bandits or the snows. Still, she persisted. A fortnight passed. Then another. On a windy afternoon, she was in the library of the Red Keep, searching for records of her father's old correspondences when she heard urgent footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Margaery enter, wearing a subtle green gown and a troubled expression. "Sansa," she said quietly. "We must speak. The small council will convene within the hour, and I fear we have a new difficulty." Sansa set aside the dusty scroll she had been examining. "What is it?" Margaery's face flickered with unease. "Littlefinger has arrived in the city." At once Sansa felt the blood drain from her cheeks. Peter Baelish, the man who had once professed to care about her, who had used her as a pawn in his labyrinthine schemes, who had sold her to the Boltons in one timeline and manipulated her at every turn. The man who had turned her Aunt Lisa into a puppet in the Vale and who was rumored to control the Eyrie. He was cunning, dangerous. She had learned never to underestimate him, no matter how kind his words might seem. She cleared her throat, fighting the old sense of dread. "When did he arrive?" "This morning," Margaery said. "He came with a small retinue, quietly, trying not to draw attention. But we keep watchers at the city gates now, precisely for such surprises. Word reached me an hour ago. He's here under the banner of the Vale, so presumably he comes as Lord Protector of young Lord Robin Arryn. He has requested an audience with King Tommen and the small council." Sansa nodded grimly. Of course Baelish would want a seat at the table. He thrived on seeing openings no one else perceived. She wondered if he had caught wind of the new alliances forming in King's Landing and decided he could steer them to his advantage. She thought of the Vale lords she had met recently, proud men who had no great fondness for Baelish, but who tolerated him because he had the ear of their young lord. If he inserted himself into Tommen's court, there was no telling what damage he might do. "I'll come with you," she said at once. "We need to keep watch on him." Margaery gave a small nod. "Yes. He's a slippery one. My grandmother always said he was a snake masquerading as a courtier. We can't afford to let him sow suspicion or manipulate Tommen. Are you prepared to face him?" Sansa drew in a steadying breath. "I am. I won't let him rattle me this time. But we must be cautious. He has the ear of the Vale, and the Vale's armies remain almost untouched by the war. We need their neutrality, if not their open support." Margaery's thoughtful gaze held a trace of sympathy for Sansa's tension. "You know him better than any of us. If you see him attempt some cunning maneuver, let me know at once. We'll keep him in check." They left the library together. The corridors felt narrower than usual as Sansa's memories pricked at her, recalling times Peter Baelish had cornered her in hush-toned conversations, offering her illusions of safety. She reminded herself that she was no longer a lonely girl desperate for a savior. She had stepped into her own power, and if Baelish believed he could manipulate her again, he was gravely mistaken. In the council chambers, the mood was wary. Lord Paxter Redwine of the Reach was seated near Margaery's chair, looking bored yet watchful. Ser Lancel Lannister, in his white cloak of the Kingsguard, stood behind Tommen's seat, his face solemn. Grand Maester Pycelle's replacement, an older but earnest scholar named Corman, sat carefully with his scrolls. Several other newly appointed counselors milled about in low conversation. Tommen himself was perched in the central seat, fiddling nervously with the gilded arms of his chair, occasionally darting worried glances at the doors. He seemed aware that something important was at stake, though he lacked the maturity to fully grasp how these political tides might shift. At length, the herald announced Peter Baelish. The doors swung open, and in came Littlefinger in a modest but finely tailored doublet of gray and silver, the mockingbird pin gleaming at his collar. He walked with the self-assurance of a man who believed he owned the halls he stepped into, offering Tommen a deep bow that was almost theatrical. "Your Grace," Baelish said in his soft, ingratiating voice, "how my heart rejoices to see you preside over a city so calm and well-provisioned. Truly, your wisdom shines in these troubled times." Tommen blinked, uncertain, and glanced at Margaery. Margaery, her posture composed, merely inclined her head. "Lord Baelish, we understand you've come in your capacity as Lord Protector of the Vale. We welcome you to King's Landing. May we ask what business brings you?" Baelish's gaze flicked briefly to Sansa. She remained still, meeting his eyes with cool composure. A hint of something curved his lips, perhaps mild surprise at her poised bearing. Then he returned his attention to Margaery. "Ah, Lady Margaery, radiant as ever. Indeed, I come to represent young Lord Robin Arryn's interests in these times. I have heard fascinating accounts of recent changes. The Queen Mother's departure, a new small council's formation, and the realm's desire for unity. The Vale stands ready to offer its support provided we can be assured our concerns will be addressed." Tommen looked uncertain. He glanced at Sansa, then back at Baelish. "You mean the Vale's neutrality in the wars?" Tommen ventured. Sansa wondered if Tommen even realized how easily Baelish might twist a conversation. Margaery stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "We indeed value the Vale's potential friendship, Lord Baelish. As you can see, we are working to keep the city stable without resorting to war or oppressive measures. It is our hope to unify the great houses in support of King Tommen's reign." Baelish placed a hand over his heart in a gesture of apparent sincerity. "Your hope is admirable, my lady. The Vale, too, desires peace. Too long have we watched from our mountains as the realm tore itself apart. But we must be pragmatic. If the Vale is to supply men or resources, we would need to see certain acknowledgements, among them the recognition of Lord Robin's rightful authority over the Vale and an understanding that House Arryn stands second to none in the East." In that moment, Sansa recognized the shape of Baelish's ploy. He wanted official recognition from Tommen that would cement his own position as regent or protector. Perhaps he also sought to place men loyal to him in key positions at court. She knew how he worked, dangling the promise of support in exchange for concessions that would broaden his power. Margaery spoke cautiously. "Certainly, the Arryns are paramount in the Vale. We would not question that. Has there been any doubt cast upon their position?" Baelish spread his hands in a humble gesture. "Oh, I believe none in this esteemed council would question it. However, rumors can be pernicious. Some lords in the Riverlands whisper about past alliances, and we have had friction with House Royce, House Grafton, and others. A formal decree from King Tommen affirming Lord Robin's status and my role as his lawful protector would soothe many anxieties. In return, I might be able to persuade the Vale Lords to lend their swords should the crown require them." Tommen blinked, then looked at Margaery and Sansa for guidance. Ser Lancel's stern expression betrayed nothing. Margaery's lips tightened and she glanced at Sansa. It was an unspoken invitation for Sansa to speak if she wished, as the only Stark in the room and the only one who knew Baelish's wiles intimately. Sansa drew a slow breath. She knew Baelish counted on them needing the Vale, but she also knew he coveted official legitimacy. She remembered his cunning in orchestrating her Aunt Lisa's death at the Eyrie, the way he had used Robin Arryn's frailties to gain near-total control over the Vale. If she allowed him to waltz into Tommen's court and extract a royal decree, he would become even more dangerous. At the same time, rebuffing him too strongly might turn him into an implacable enemy. She chose her words carefully. "Lord Baelish, the Vale's support would, of course, be invaluable," she began, her voice calm. "And King Tommen appreciates all loyal houses in the realm. However, we are also aware that the Vale Lords themselves, among them Lord Royce, have their own opinions on how best to serve young Robin's interests. Is there any chance you come with letters from them, signifying a united front? Or are you here on your own initiative?" She knew that if he had not secured the Vale Lord's consensus, his claims to speak for the entire region might ring hollow. That question might force him to reveal whether or not he truly had the Vale behind him. Baelish's eyes glinted with something like amusement. "My Lady Sansa, you have grown most perceptive since we last spoke. Indeed, I hold letters from several prominent Vale Lords. They have entrusted me with the well-being of their beloved Lord Robin. He produced a small leather pouch which he extended to Margaery. Feel free to inspect these seals. You will find them legitimate. The veil stands in support of our new king so long as our concerns are heard. Margaery accepted the pouch, passed it to Lord Redwine for verification. Silence hung in the room for a few moments as Redwine looked over the letters. Meanwhile, Baelish's gaze flicked once more to Sansa, measuring her. She refused to lower her eyes. She was not that timid child anymore. Eventually, Redwine nodded. These are indeed the seals of houses Grafton, Royce, Belmore, and Waynwood. It appears Lord Baelish is not acting alone. Tommen exhaled, relief mingling with his nerves. Then I see no reason to deny the veil the assurances it seeks. If we can have your sworn vow, Lord Baelish, that you come in peace and do not seek to upset our new arrangements. Baelish bowed again. You have my vow, your grace. I simply wish for the veil to take its rightful place as a steadfast ally in preserving the peace you have built. Margaery did not look entirely convinced by his show of humility, but she gave a small nod. We shall discuss the formal decree at the next council session, ensuring all details are in order. In the meantime, Lord Baelish, we welcome you to the capital as an honored guest. We trust you will find everything to your liking. A faint smile touched his lips and Sansa suppressed a shiver. Thank you, Lady Margaery, King Tommen. I look forward to assisting the realm in any way I can. The meeting ended shortly thereafter. Sansa left the chambers with Margaery, who escorted her to a side corridor where a pair of Tyrell guards waited. Only once they were out of earshot did Margaery speak in a low voice. He's as slippery as ever. Sansa nodded. He wants more than just a decree. He always wants something else. He'll seek to gain influence with Tommen, maybe attempt to sow divisions. If we're not careful, he'll turn half the council to his advantage. Margaery's brow furrowed. We need the Veil's swords, though. The realm still faces threats at every corner. Cersei's possible maneuvers from Casterly Rock, the Iron Bank's demands, and the tensions in the north. If Baelish can deliver the Veil, it might keep the peace. But if he uses this as leverage to climb even higher, we risk him overshadowing us all. They walked on in tense silence. Finally, Margaery said, We must watch him carefully. If we suspect he's plotting to undermine the crown, we'll act. But for now, perhaps we grant him a small token of recognition, enough to appease him but not enough to make him untouchable. Agreed. Sansa considered it and agreed with a curt nod. We'll be vigilant. That's all we can do for now. In the days that followed, Baelish made himself a quiet but constant presence in King's Landing. He took up residence in a modest estate near the city center, declining an offer to stay at the Red Keep in what Sansa suspected was a deliberate show of independence. He frequented the keep for council sessions, always polite, always ready with a mild suggestion or a well-timed compliment. He expressed approval of Margaery's policies to feed the city, insisted that Tommen's rule was wise, and was ever so gracious to Sansa. Yet behind his smiles, Sansa detected the old cunning, the sense of a man collecting secrets. Rumors sprang up that Baelish was meeting with certain merchants and bankers late at night. Whispers spoke of side deals to secure his personal wealth, or promises that might tie the Veil's fortunes to trade routes passing through Harrenhal and the Trident. Others whispered that he kept a line of communication open with Cersei at Casterly Rock, though no one had proof. Sansa found herself haunted by those rumors. She worried that Baelish might attempt to restore Cersei if it served his aims, or at least play both sides so that whichever faction emerged victorious, he would profit. Yet if anyone confronted him, he would simply smile and deny everything. Amid this uncertain climate, Sansa received her first reply from the north. One morning, a messenger arrived with a sealed letter bearing the Merman sigil of House Manderly. Sansa's heart raced as she took the parchment to her chambers, breaking the seal in private. She had not written specifically to Wyman Manderly. Her letters were more general, addressed to multiple houses, but evidently, he had taken it upon himself to respond. The letter was somewhat cryptic, referencing the tragedies that had befallen the Starks and the uncertain hold the Boltons maintained on Winterfell. Yet there was a thread of hope, for Manderly spoke of a possible meeting if ever Sansa or her representatives could travel north. He mentioned discreetly that the Manderlys had not forgotten their allegiance to the Starks, though openly they had to show feigned loyalty to the Boltons. He also wrote that if the crown recognized Manderley authority over White Harbor without interfering, House Manderley might join any move to restore the Stark name in the north. Sansa read the letter 3 times, her eyes brimming with conflicting emotions. Part of her yearned to ride north at once, to rally any loyal houses and reclaim her home. But she knew it was not so simple. Winterfell was in the Boltons' grip, and her last news had been that Roose Bolton and his son Ramsay were tightening their hold. The idea of returning to Winterfell only to face them again made her stomach roil, and she recalled with cold horror the tales she had heard of Ramsay's cruelty. That evening, she summoned Margaery to her chambers and showed her the letter. Margaery read it carefully and set it aside. If House Manderley is secretly loyal, it's promising, but to act on this we'd need a firmer backing from the north and from the crown as well. Tommen can't openly move against the Boltons because, on paper, they are recognized wardens of the north. Lord Bolton still claims to uphold the crown's authority. Sansa wrapped her arms around herself. I know, but if we do nothing, the Boltons will continue to rule the north through fear. My home, it's in the hands of men who destroyed my family. Margaery's eyes shone with quiet empathy. We'll find a way. For now, perhaps we can keep lines of communication open, gather more allies. If we push too soon, we risk open conflict. The city is not ready for another war. We can't handle a southern and northern front at once. Sansa nodded reluctantly. She understood the logic. She had sworn to seek a peaceful path wherever possible. They had succeeded with Cersei for now, and they might do the same with the Boltons if they carefully undermined them, forging alliances that might isolate that house. Yet patience was a difficult virtue to maintain when she thought of Winterfell's stolen halls. She set the letter aside for the moment, deciding to pen a courteous reply that neither promised open rebellion nor forfeited her claim. In the meantime, life in King's Landing continued with a semblance of normalcy. Margaery presided over ceremonies in the Great September, showing her benevolence to the people and the faith. Tommen greeted envoys from across the realm, though any real decisions typically came from the small council's discussions guided by Margaery and her supporters. Sansa attended many of these gatherings, offering her quiet voice when needed, learning more about the intricacies of governance than she had ever imagined as a girl. It was both empowering and wearisome. Sometimes, after an exhausting day of negotiations and rumor chasing, she would retreat to her chambers and recall her old dream of being a simple lady in a castle married to a kind knight with no cares but for music and flowers. That dream now felt naive. She had grown beyond it. Autumn arrived in earnest, bringing cooler winds that carried a foretaste of the winter to come. King's Landing's climate remained milder than the North's, but the nights were chilly, and the threat of storms loomed. Sansa often found herself gazing at the gray sky, remembering the old Stark words, "Winter is coming." She suspected it was no longer just a saying. The true cold might soon envelop the realm. One afternoon, as she strolled the gardens alone, she heard footsteps behind her. She tensed, turning to see who approached, and found Peter Baelish, his hands folded peacefully before him. "Lady Sansa," he greeted with a small bow. "I hope I am not intruding on your solitude." She forced a polite smile, though her nerves prickled. "Not at all, my lord. I was taking a moment to enjoy the lemon blossoms." He stepped closer, casting a glance at the trees. "They do give a pleasant fragrance, do they not? A touch of gentleness in a city known for its harsh intrigues." He paused. "Speaking of intrigues, I've heard rumor you've received letters from the north. Something about House Manderley?" Her muscles went rigid. She should have expected that Baelish would have heard about it. "I receive many letters," she said, feigning calm. "As Lady of Winterfell by birth, it's only natural that some northern houses would reach out to me." He smiled in that infuriatingly knowing way. "Indeed, indeed. If you ever need assistance in corresponding with those far-off lords, do let me know. I have certain channels of communication that might expedite such matters. The roads can be perilous." She took a slow breath, fighting the urge to snap at him. "Your offer is appreciated," she replied with forced politeness. "But I have the resources of the crown at my disposal now." He nodded affably. "Of course. How silly of me. Nevertheless, I do hope you'll keep me apprised of any interesting developments in the north. As you know, I have some investment there, Harrenhal being in the Riverlands, so near to the neck. A stable north benefits us all." She had no intention of confiding anything to him, but she kept her face neutral. If the North finds stability, I'm sure all the realm will rejoice. He studied her, as though searching for a crack in her poise. Then he inclined his head. I see the little bird has grown new wings. I admire your poise, Sansa. Perhaps we'll talk again soon. With that, he turned and vanished among the hedges, leaving her heart pounding with a mix of anger and unease. That evening, she told Margaery of the encounter. Margaery listened carefully. He wants to insert himself into your northern plans. We must ensure he doesn't gain leverage over you, or over the Manderleys or any other house. If the North hears that Baelish is involved, they might mistrust our intentions. The name of Baelish doesn't inspire loyalty in men like Wyman Manderley, I suspect. Sansa agreed. She resolved to keep her communications with the North private, trusting only those she knew would not betray her. Yet she did wonder if it might be possible to use Baelish's cunning in a limited way. As a last resort, perhaps, she shuddered at the thought of owing him any favors. Another few weeks passed and the tension in the capital began to crackle again. This time, the cause was not Bread or Lannister oppression, but murmurs of a new threat in the east, stories filtered in about Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons, about entire cities in Essos falling under her banner, about her rumored plan to sail for Westeros once she had consolidated power. The small council took note, though Margaery was uncertain how seriously to regard those tales. Tommen, upon hearing the name Targaryen, seemed more confused than alarmed. Sansa remembered that Stannis had claimed the throne once, and now a Targaryen might do the same. The cycle of war could continue if they were not careful. The city's mood soured at each rumor, for some feared that dragons would scorch them all. Others, ironically, whispered that if Daenerys came to claim the Iron Throne, she might be kinder than the Lannisters had been. Sansa found it impossible to guess how a Targaryen invasion might unfold. Then, as if the realm needed more difficulties, word arrived from the Iron Bank of Bravos. Representatives demanded an audience with King Tommen, pressing for repayment of the crown's vast debts. Sansa attended the meeting. Margaery tried her best to placate the Bravosi representatives, offering partial repayments drawn from the Tyrell coffers. The bankers insisted on a strict schedule of installments. Tommen, overwhelmed, looked to his council for help. In the end, they brokered a tense arrangement to repay the Iron Bank over several years, tying it to the continued grain shipments from the Reach and the potential gold shipments from the Westerlands, though Cersei's absence complicated the latter. The bankers left with cool satisfaction, but Sansa could see the worry in Margaery's eyes. The crown was still deeply in debt. The Tyrells could not support the entire kingdom's finances indefinitely. If the Vale or the North did not stabilize, new revenue would be scarce. Another spark of potential crisis glowed on the horizon. In the midst of all this, small but hopeful changes continued. The city's purse still had bread, thanks to Margaery's supervision. The gold cloaks enforced order with fewer brutal displays of power. Trials were conducted with more transparency than in Cersei's day, and a handful of Lannister loyalists who tried to stir unrest were quietly exiled or placed under watch. Tommen seemed to be growing slightly more confident, especially with Margaery at his side. He was still a boy, but occasionally he displayed a flicker of the regal composure that might bloom as he matured. For Sansa, daily life had become a mixture of small triumphs and quiet anxieties. She would smile when a servant thanked her for ensuring the city's improvement, or when she saw children playing in the courtyard without fear. Yet each day brought a new rumor or complication that threatened to unravel the peace. She felt the relentless tug of the North in her heart, a call to return and restore her family's home. But the path forward remained tangled. She could not simply abandon King's Landing and the alliance she had worked so hard to forge. Doing so would risk letting Baelish or some other threat undermine Tommen's fragile rule. After many hours of reflection, she decided to send a more candid reply to Lord Manderley, one that would outline her intention to find a peaceful path to challenge the Boltons. She stated clearly that she would not ride north with an army, nor did she seek open war at this time, but that she wished to gather more loyalists who might be prepared to declare for House Stark if the Boltons weakened. She invited Manderley's advice and even asked if there was a way to reach out to her half-brother, Jon, at the Wall, in the hopes that he might lend moral support. She sealed the letter and sent it off with a trusted messenger, praying it would reach White Harbor safely. That same evening, Margaery invited her to a small gathering in the Solar, a subtle affair with only a few of their closest allies. Leonette Fossaway was there, along with Ser Tal Ad, returned from a mission in the Riverlands, and a couple of Tyrell knights who had proven trustworthy during the transition. They spoke quietly, away from the public eye. Wine was poured, though Sansa drank sparingly. Margaery began the discussion by updating them on the developments with the Braavosi bankers and the situation with Baelish. Ser Talad reported that the Riverlands were still in disarray, with bands of outlaws roaming and petty lords squabbling. The war left many scars, he said. But the Tully name still inspires loyalty in certain pockets, especially around Riverrun, even if the phrase officially hold it. There's talk of the Blackfish, Brynden Tully rallying men again. Leonette said softly, if chaos continues in the Riverlands, it might disrupt the Crown's supply lines from the Reach. We'll need safe roads. Margaery nodded, then looked at Sansa. We might consider forging alliances with those loyal to the Tullys. Your mother was a Tully, was she not? Sansa felt a pang, remembering her mother's bright auburn hair and warm voice. Yes, she answered. So was my uncle Edmure, my great-uncle Brynden. If the Blackfish is still out there, he might be an ally, though I haven't heard from him since the Red Wedding. I doubt he'd trust any alliance that includes Baelish, though. They despised each other. Margaery exchanged glances with Leonette. We can keep Baelish away from those negotiations. If we offer the Tully loyalists the chance to unify under King Tommen's peace, perhaps that will bring them out of hiding. Sansa considered the possibility. It might, though the Freys are sworn to the crown too. If we're seen favoring the Tully rebels, it could create friction with the Freys. And Walder Frey is not a man to take such offense lightly. Margaery shrugged. House Frey commands little love or respect after the Red Wedding. Even so, they hold the crossing at the Twins, a valuable strategic point. We can't just ignore them. She sighed. All of this balancing is maddening, but if we don't do it, we risk war. Their small council in the Solar continued late into the night, mapping out potential strategies for the Riverlands. They spoke also of Dorne, which had retreated into sullen isolation after the deaths in the war. Prince Doran had been rumored ill, and the Sand Snakes unpredictable. Margaery proposed a diplomatic overture to the Martells, hoping to bring them back into the fold. Sansa realized with a sinking sensation just how many fractures still marred the realm. The achievement of removing Cersei without bloodshed had been a miracle, but it was only the beginning of a massive puzzle. Restoring stability to Westeros would require more than a few quiet deals. It might require the entire realm's cooperation. When the gathering ended, Sansa returned to her chambers feeling exhausted. Yet as she prepared for bed, she reflected that she would rather face these challenges openly, working with Margaery in good faith, than return to the old days of being manipulated and kept ignorant. She had found a calling that transcended the timid dreams of her youth, a determination to protect the realm from the horrors that had claimed her family. As she lay in bed, her mind drifted to a faint memory of Robb, telling her once that the North would always stand strong if its people held together. She intended to see that truth spread across the realm if she could. Autumn deepened, and the leaves in the royal gardens began to shift to shades of yellow and orange. The southern climate did not produce the dramatic flaming colors of the North's weirwoods, but there was still a certain beauty as the season advanced. The nights grew colder, and the wind from Blackwater Bay carried a sharp tang. People in the city muttered about winter's onset, though many did not truly understand what that meant. Sansa could almost feel the far-off cold in her bones, as if the memory of northern snow haunted her. Then came fresh word from Casterly Rock. Cersei Lannister had made no overt moves to reclaim power, but she was rumored to be gathering Lannister bannermen under the pretext of defending the Westerlands. Intelligence suggested she still had loyal knights and, of course, the Rock's gold mines, though some whispered those mines had begun to run dry, which might explain the Lannisters' mounting debts. Margaery's watchers speculated that Cersei might be biding her time, waiting for a moment of weakness in King's Landing to strike. The knowledge that she lurked there, thirsting for revenge, left a shadow over every day's negotiations. Peter Baelish seemed particularly unconcerned by Cersei's doings, which made Sansa all the more uneasy. Sometimes she caught him smiling to himself as though he knew a secret that no one else did. Yet he continued to profess loyalty to Tommen's rule and busied himself in the Vale's affairs, occasionally traveling back and forth between King's Landing and the Eyrie. Rumors suggested he was slowly winning favor from key Vale lords, partly by promising them a role in the capital's new order. In truth, his presence hovered like a snake on a branch, never directly striking, but always near. Amid these undercurrents, Sansa found some solace in the letters she exchanged with Lord Manderley. He hinted that other Northmen, including some Castellan of the Karstarks and a minor branch of the Cerwyns, might be open to a secret alliance if the Bolton's hold weakened. More heartening yet, he spoke of receiving word from Castle Black, where Jon Snow served as Lord Commander. Manderley did not reveal details, but it seemed that Jon was aware of Sansa's presence in King's Landing. Whether he approved or not was uncertain, but he did not condemn her. Reading that line, Sansa felt a lump in her throat, thinking of Jon at the Wall. She wondered if he faced the rumored White Walkers that old stories spoke of. The idea of that dread rising in the far north made her efforts in King's Landing feel urgent, as if the petty politics here might pale in comparison to a threat beyond the Wall. The day came when Sansa was summoned to the throne room for a special announcement. She had no inkling what it might be. She arrived to find Tommen seated on the Iron Throne, Margaery to one side, the new Grand Maester Cormon on the other, and a scattering of lords and ladies in attendance. Peter Baelish stood near the front, wearing a small smile. When Sansa joined the ranks, Tommen began to speak, his voice carefully measured. "We gather to ratify an agreement between the Crown and the Vale. After consultation with the small council, we have decided to grant a royal decree confirming Lord Robin Arryn's status as the ruling Lord of the Vale, with Peter Baelish continuing as Lord Protector until Robin comes of age. The Vale shall, in return, pledge support and loyalty to the Crown, aiding in the defense and stability of the realm." Sansa's heart thumped. She glanced at Margaery, who gave her a subtle nod. So this was the arrangement they had decided upon. A compromise to keep Baelish appeased and secure the Vale's swords. Sansa loathed the idea of giving Baelish more official legitimacy, but she understood the necessity. If the Vale threw its strength behind Tommen's reign, that was a powerful shield against both Cersei and any rebellious lords in the Riverlands. Perhaps it would free them to focus on the north in time. Tommen gestured, and Grand Maester Cormon read aloud the official decree. Peter Baelish stepped forward to accept it. He bowed low, feigning a humble expression. "Your Grace," he said, "the Vale is honored to stand with you. We shall keep the peace and ensure no harm comes to the realm under our watch." Murmurs swept the crowd. Some were relieved. Others looked wary. Sansa noticed Baelish's eyes flick to her momentarily, a spark of triumph in them. Despite her wariness, she kept her face smooth, reminding herself that this was a measured concession to stave off chaos. Afterwards, in private, Sansa asked Margaery, "Are we sure this was wise? He'll be almost untouchable now." Margaery sighed. "We had no better option. We need the Vale's support. Believe me, I dislike giving Baelish more leverage, but it was either that or watch him slip away to cut a deal with Cersei or the Braavosi or the Freys. Now at least we have him bound by official oath. If he breaks it, he'll be named an open traitor. That might deter even him." Sansa hoped so. Still, the sense of foreboding nagged at her. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching winter. Yet the city's day-to-day life continued, with courtiers praising the newest decree, merchants forging new trade lines to the Vale, and common folk more interested in the price of bread than the complexities of court alliances. If Baelish was plotting something, he would keep it hidden behind a mask of smiles and courtesies. A month later, an unexpected visitor arrived in King's Landing. A man who claimed to be an envoy from the Wall, sent by Jon Snow. Sansa heard the news early in the morning and hurried to the gates where Margaery stood with several guards. The man was rugged, clad in black leathers, unshaven, and clearly weary from his travels. He bowed to King Tommen, who was also present, bundled in a cloak against the chill morning air, and then turned to Sansa with an earnest respect. "My lady, I come on behalf of Lord Commander Snow. He sends word that the threat beyond the Wall grows. He urges you not to forget the danger in the north, that the Night's Watch stands as the realm's first defense. And he hopes you may use your influence to rally the lords of Westeros if the Wall should fall." Sansa felt her heartbeat quicken. She glanced at Tommen, who wore a puzzled expression. Margaery looked intrigued but uncertain. Most people south of the Neck regarded stories of the undead and White Walkers as tall tales. Sansa herself had once done so, but she had heard enough rumors from the north to suspect otherwise. She swallowed and spoke quietly. "Did Jon say what he needs?" The envoy nodded. Men, my lady, and supplies. The watch is severely undermanned. Many lords ignore us, thinking the threat is imaginary. But the free folk are fleeing south in terror, and rumors speak of an undead army. The cold winds blow. We need the realm's support. Tommen blinked. Undead army? That's impossible, isn't it? Margaery gave Sansa a sidelong look, compassion in her eyes. We have heard rumors, your grace, but never direct confirmation. Lord Commander Snow is an honorable man. Perhaps we should not dismiss his warning. Tommen hesitated, plainly startled by the idea. Yes, of course, but how can we be sure? The envoy took a deep breath. I've seen things, sire. Things I'd rather forget. On the other side of the wall, the winds sing with voices that are not human. The free folk speak of white walkers with eyes like ice. Please, I beg you, at least send some men and supplies north. The watch stands for all the realm. A hush fell. Sansa felt a roil of emotion. Fear of a threat they could not easily fight. Relief that Jon was still thinking of her. And a sense of frustration that so many in the south would dismiss these tidings. Margaery, always keen-minded, seemed torn between practicality and the moral imperative. She cleared her throat. Your Grace, the realm can spare some supplies at the very least. Perhaps a contingent of volunteers, if any exist. But we must tread carefully. Our forces are stretched thin, and many lords might protest sending men so far away. Sansa stepped forward, her voice steady. King Tommen, please consider this. My father always believed the threat of the others was real. My half-brother Jon is not a man to invent falsehoods. Let's do what we can, at least send some food stores, some weapons. It may prove vital. Tommen looked from her to Margaery, then to the envoy. The weight of kingship pressed down on him visibly. Finally, he nodded. Yes, we can spare something. We'll arrange for a shipment of grain, some weapons, furs. I'll issue a call for volunteers from among the city's mercenaries and spare knights. I can't force them to go, but perhaps some will be drawn by a sense of duty or coin. I want no talk that the crown abandoned the wall. A small spark of relief flickered in Sansa's chest. It was a compromise, far less than Jon likely needed, but better than nothing. The envoy bowed in gratitude. Thank you, your grace. I'll deliver your reply to the Lord Commander. The North must stand together or we'll all freeze. Tommen signaled that the man would be given lodging for the night, so he could rest before returning north. When the envoy was led away, Sansa noticed Margaery's expression, a blend of curiosity, concern, and faint apprehension. Margaery met her gaze and spoke in a low tone. This is beyond politics, isn't it? If the dead truly rise in the far north, all our careful alliances will mean little. Sansa nodded, feeling the gravity. Yes. It reminds me that no matter how many deals we strike here, something bigger could sweep down from beyond the wall. My father used to say that once the others come, they don't care who sits on the Iron Throne. Margaery touched her arm gently. We'll do what we can, but we must first ensure the realm is united. If we remain splintered, we'll stand no chance against such a threat. Sansa realized that was precisely the reason she was still in King's Landing, to help unify the realm instead of letting it slide back into chaos. However harrowing her time here might be, it was necessary. She silently vowed to continue forging alliances, stabilizing Tommen's rule, and searching for ways to reclaim the North without plunging everyone into fresh bloodshed. That same day, as though summoned by fate, a raven arrived from White Harbor bearing another letter from Lord Manderley. The words it contained made Sansa's breath catch. Rumor had reached him that Stannis Baratheon, once the pretender to the throne, had marched on the Boltons at Winterfell and suffered a defeat, leaving the Boltons as secure as ever. But other rumors suggested that the Bolton bastards were stirring up fear among the North's smallfolk, and discontent brewed behind closed doors. The letter hinted that if Sansa could provide a figurehead, some means of rallying the North behind the true Stark line, many houses might be willing to rise. But they would need outside support, or at least the promise that the crown would not intervene on the Boltons' behalf. Sansa read that line and felt her heartbeat quicken. This was an invitation for her to take a larger step toward reclaiming Winterfell. Yet she also knew it was an enormous risk. If she tried to raise the North in rebellion without first ensuring Tommen's neutrality, it could set the crown itself against her. And if she failed, the Boltons would come for her with a vengeance. For long minutes, she sat in her chamber, absorbing the letter's import. Then she rose, squared her shoulders, and went to find Margaery. She found the queen in all but name in a small courtyard, speaking with a few attendants about the distribution of new cloaks for the poor. Sansa waited for them to depart, then approached Margaery, letter in hand. She explained the gist of it. The North might rise if a Stark claimant appeared and if the crown did not suppress them on the Boltons' behalf. Margaery's expression grew serious. She studied Sansa. This is the moment you've longed for, isn't it? A real chance to retake Winterfell. Sansa's voice was tight with mixed emotion. Yes. But I fear what might happen if the Boltons cry treason and call on the crown's authority. Margaery took a moment to consider. We control the small council, but officially the Boltons are recognized as wardens of the North. If they appeal to King Tommen, the king might be honor-bound to defend them, unless we can craft some reason to declare them traitors. Cersei recognized them, after all, not Tommen directly. Perhaps we can sow doubt about their loyalty to the crown. If we prove they defied some royal command, or if we provide evidence of their crimes, Tommen could revoke their legitimacy. Then your claim could proceed. Sansa's mind spun. Evidence of their crimes might not be hard to find. The Boltons have been brutal. But I must gather it in a way that can't be dismissed as rumor. Margaery offered a tentative smile. Then we gather it. Quietly, discreetly. We can send trusted agents north to collect testimony, maybe even free some of the Boltons' prisoners. If they return with proof of atrocities, we can present it to Tommen. Once the Boltons are declared traitors, the crown can withdraw its support, perhaps even command the other northern houses to oust them. And in that moment, you could step in to claim your birthright. Sansa felt a surge of cautious hope. This was exactly the sort of cunning approach that might avoid a full-blown war. Still, the risk was great. The Boltons were not fools. They would sense if their enemies were gathering evidence. And if Baelish caught wind of this plan, who knew how he might exploit it? She touched Margaery's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "We must do this carefully." Margaery nodded. "We will. I'll speak to grandmother. She has networks of informants that reach far. We'll keep Baelish out of it if we can." So began a new phase of Sansa's secret council. Just as she and Margaery had once plotted Cersei's removal with quiet alliances and whispered plans, they now plotted to unseat the Boltons. The official story would be that the king was investigating rumors of northern unrest, that certain lords loyal to House Stark had lodged formal complaints about the Boltons' brutality. If the investigation confirmed serious crimes against the crown's peace, well, Tommen would have little choice but to act. In truth, Sansa had more personal reasons for wanting the Boltons gone, but she disguised them under the language of justice. As she saw it, the Boltons had betrayed the realm at the Red Wedding, murdering her brother Robb under the auspices of guest right. They had inflicted untold cruelty on the North. That alone was reason enough to declare them traitors if it could be proven. Officially, Tommen did not want more chaos, but he also had no love for the Boltons. He barely knew them. If the evidence was compelling, if Margaery and the small council insisted, he would likely revoke their legitimacy. Then the North might rise behind Sansa or behind some combination of Stark loyalists. Winterfell could be hers again without igniting a new full-scale war in the southern kingdoms. The weeks of autumn slid by in a flurry of covert letters, nighttime meetings, and strategic decisions. Trusted agents were dispatched northward with instructions to gather sworn testimonies of Bolton atrocities or anything else that would brand them as traitors. Contact was made with select northern houses that might be willing to provide safe passage for these agents. Sansa's nerves frayed as she waited for news. Margaery juggled these hidden plans alongside the daily demands of ruling the city, all the while ensuring Baelish remained ignorant or at least uninterested in the details. Then, a month later, the first set of agents returned. They had traveled only as far as Moat Cailin and the nearby areas, but they brought troubling tidings. Men whispered of flayed corpses, forced marriages, and the disappearance of potential heirs who threatened Bolton authority. Several petty lords had been bullied into submission under threat of torture. For a while, the Boltons had used the fear of the Ironborn raids to rally support, but now that the Ironborn threat had subsided in the north, folk were more frightened of Bolton cruelty than any external foe. Though the agents had not gone all the way to Winterfell, what they had seen was disturbing enough. Margaery called a quiet meeting in her solar with Sansa, Lionett, Ser Talad, and 2 members of the council they trusted. Spread out on the table were scraps of testimony, statements from peasants and minor lords who risked their lives sharing these accounts. The question now was how to turn them into official evidence. "The king will want more than rumors," said Lionett. "He'll want named witnesses who can appear in King's Landing or at least sign sworn affidavits. Otherwise, the Boltons will deny everything." Ser Talad tapped the table. We must also consider that the Boltons could claim these are forgeries. We need someone of rank, a known figure in the north who has witnessed these crimes. Perhaps a lord or a maester with impeccable credentials. Sansa pressed her palms together. We should find Maester Wolkan of Winterfell if he still lives. He served there before the Boltons. He might have records or letters detailing their actions. But she did not know if the Maester had survived. Another possibility was any captive lady who had escaped Bolton hands, though she prayed there were few who had endured that horror. Margaery exhaled. We proceed carefully. We'll keep sending agents, try to locate a reliable witness of standing. Once we have that, we can present the case to Tommen. With enough evidence, we can label the Boltons outlaws. The plan moved forward. The winter winds blew colder. The city huddled against the chill, though no snow fell this far south yet. Sansa tried to keep her composure as the days turned to weeks again, wondering if their evidence would come too late or if the Boltons would discover the infiltration and retaliate. Meanwhile, Baelish drifted around with an air of polite amusement, as if he knew some secret advantage was soon to be his. He asked Sansa probing questions about the north, which she deftly deflected. The letters from Manderley grew bolder, describing open dissatisfaction with the Boltons in White Harbor, though no direct rebellion yet. It was clear the north teetered on the edge of revolt, needing only a catalyst. Finally, 3 days before the official start of winter was proclaimed, the crucial witness arrived. She was a Northwoman in her 50s, once a retainer to House Hornwood, who had escaped Bolton captivity after her lady was forced into a coerced marriage and then vanished. This woman, Dame Helia, had credible ties to the Hornwood line and possessed knowledge of both the Red Wedding's aftermath and specific outrages carried out by Ramsay Bolton. Leonette and Ser Talad escorted her into the city under heavy secrecy, lodging her in a discreet home near the Red Keep. After several tense meetings, they confirmed the validity of her story, verifying her identity with old letters from House Hornwood. She bore scars that spoke of captivity and torture. She named specific men who had carried out atrocities at Bolton behest. In short, she provided exactly the sort of direct, horrific testimony the Crown could not ignore. Sansa sat with Margaery one night after hearing Dame Helia's story in detail. Outside the window, the wind howled. A new storm was blowing in from the bay, rattling shutters and stirring waves. Sansa felt shaken. She had known the Boltons were cruel, but hearing the specifics sickened her. We can't let them remain, she said quietly. Even if I cared nothing for Winterfell, those people are suffering under the worst tyranny. Father used to say no lord should flay his vassals. Margaery nodded, her expression grim. You're right. Tomorrow, we'll bring her before Tommen and the small council. She'll share her testimony. Then I'll propose that we declare the Boltons traitors to the crown, guilty of the same crimes that condemned the Freys after the Red Wedding. With luck, Tommen will stand by us. Sansa swallowed. And if he hesitates? Margaery's eyes flickered. He might. The Boltons still have gold, and some Lannister loyalists might argue we need the Boltons' loyalty in the north. But if the testimony is damning enough, and if we promise an alternative, namely you, then Tommen might be compelled to rule in your favor. After all, your father was Warden of the North. Your claim is more legitimate than the Boltons ever was. Fear and excitement mingled in Sansa's stomach. The next day could be the turning point she had dreamed of, the official revival of House Stark's authority in the north. And yet it meant exposing Dame Helia, risking her life if Tommen vacillated or if Baelish interfered. She whispered a prayer to the old gods before bedding down, the wind keening outside her window. Morning arrived stormy and gray. The small council convened in the throne room with only a select group of lords in attendance, as well as Peter Baelish. Sansa and Margaery entered side by side, heads held high. Dame Helia was brought forward, escorted by Leonette and Ser Talad. She knelt before Tommen, who looked puzzled at first, then uneasy when he saw her scars. Grand Maester Corman cleared his throat. We gather to hear the testimony of this Northwoman who brings grievous accusations against House Bolton. Tommen frowned. House Bolton is recognized as Warden of the North. What accusations could be so grave? Dame Helia began to speak, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. She spoke of how her lady had been forced into marriage with Ramsay Bolton, then vanished under suspicious circumstances. She recounted how entire villages were made to pay tribute in flayed skins if they did not swear loyalty. She described glimpses of brutality in the dungeons of the Dreadfort, where men and women were tortured beyond reason. She even produced a scrap of cloth bearing the flayed man's sigil scrawled with blood, a memento she had smuggled out. Her testimony, raw and harrowing, filled the throne room with a horrified silence. Sansa found her hands clenched tight. Margaery's knuckles turned white on the armrest of her seat. When Dame Helia finished, Tommen looked pale. "This cannot be true," he whispered, glancing toward Lancel for reassurance. Lancel merely looked grave. Baelish stepped forward, lifting his voice with deceptive calm. "Your Grace, these are indeed disturbing claims. But might they be the words of a disgruntled servant exaggerating rumors for her own ends? Should we condemn a house as significant as the Boltons on mere hearsay?" A wave of unease rippled through the courtiers. Some nodded in agreement, others glared at Baelish for questioning the woman's sincerity. Sansa's heart hammered. Margaery rose then, her voice steady but carrying a fervor. "This is no mere rumor. We have other statements, other testimonies. Should you require it, we can present more evidence from the north. The Boltons helped orchestrate the Red Wedding and have since ruled by terror. If you doubt this single voice, we can gather more." Tommen's eyes darted from Margaery to Baelish. "But the Boltons fought for House Lannister at the Twins. They were recognized by my mother. If we declare them traitors, we risk losing the North entirely." Margaery bowed her head slightly. "I understand your concerns, Your Grace. Yet I believe we have a solution. The rightful warden of the North should be Sansa Stark. She is the daughter of Ned Stark, the last legitimate warden before the war. If you name her your warden, many northern houses will rally to her banner. We've had word that key houses like the Manderleys and Serwyns are prepared to support her. The North will not be lost. On the contrary, it will be reclaimed from cruelty." A hush fell. Baelish glanced at Sansa, narrowing his eyes. "Lady Sansa is indeed a Stark by birth, but are we certain the North prefers her over the Boltons? Might there be further strife?" Leonette spoke up. "The Boltons' atrocities have sown hatred across the North. The name Stark still commands loyalty. If the crown endorses Lady Sansa, the realm will see that King Tommen stands for justice rather than fear." Baelish began another objection, but Tommen raised a hand. The boy king looked at Dame Helia's tear-streaked face, then at Sansa and Margaery. Slowly, Tommen nodded, his expression resolved. I cannot allow such cruelty to stand. If half these charges are true, the Boltons have betrayed the crown by committing atrocities under its banner. I will revoke their status as wardens of the North and declare them traitors to the crown." Gasps of shock filled the hall. Baelish's eyes flashed, but he remained silent. Tommen continued, clearing his throat. "I hereby proclaim Sansa Stark the true Lady of Winterfell, rightful warden of the North, and call upon all loyal houses to support her claim. Furthermore, the Boltons are summoned to answer for their crimes. Should they resist, they will face the full condemnation of the realm." A wave of relief and elation swept through Sansa, nearly overwhelming her. Margaery placed a gentle hand on her arm, a silent gesture of congratulations. Dame Helia let out a sob, bowing her head in gratitude. Baelish looked on with a tight-lipped smile that did not reach his eyes. He had lost this round, evidently. As the courtiers erupted into murmured debate, Sansa felt tears gathering. She had dreamed of this day, a legitimate path to reclaim Winterfell, sanctioned by the crown itself. But the challenges ahead were enormous. She would need to rally the North, coordinate with houses that had lived in fear of the Boltons, and possibly fight a campaign if the Boltons refused to yield. And even if they succeeded, winter's cold was closing in. The resources for a war would be strained. Yet the significance was undeniable. She had done it. She and Margaery, forging alliances, uncovering evidence, persuading Tommen, all without plunging King's Landing into the chaos of open rebellion. The path was laid for a peaceful restoration of House Stark in the North, if the Boltons chose to surrender. If they did not, the realm would stand behind her. She was no longer a powerless maiden. She was recognized as the rightful lady of her ancestral home, a warden of the North in her own name. Even as she stood there, trembling with emotion, she caught Margaery's soft smile. In it, she saw pride, camaraderie, and a shared sense of destiny. They had toppled Cersei without war. Now they aimed to free the North from Bolton cruelty. If they could accomplish that, maybe they could unite Westeros further, bracing for the colder storms yet to come. For the first time, Sansa believed that, with the right allies, she might face even the horrors beyond the wall. She would not do it alone. When the session ended, Tommen formally instructed the scribes to draft letters to every major northern house, declaring the Boltons outlaws and urging them to uphold Sansa Stark as warden. Dame Helia was given a place of honor among the court for her bravery, though she seemed content merely to remain alive in a city far from the Dreadfort. Baelish vanished from the hall, presumably to scheme in private. A swirl of anxious excitement overtook the courtiers, who recognized a major shift in power. Some seemed thrilled at the fall of a brutal house. Others worried about what the Boltons' response would be. But none could deny that the realm was changing. Margaery gathered Sansa into a gentle embrace once they were safely in a side corridor, away from prying eyes. "You did it," Margaery murmured. "Your father would be proud." Sansa felt tears dampen her lashes. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Thank you, Margaery." Margaery's smile glowed with genuine warmth. "I told you once we're stronger together. That has not changed." They parted, aware that the real work lay ahead. Letters were sent north by swift riders, bearing the king's seal and Sansa's personal words to the houses that might join her. Sansa wrote passionately, reminding them of the legacy of Ned Stark, calling for unity in the face of winter. She promised fairness, stability, a renewal of the old northern customs. She asked them to reject flaying and cruelty, to stand with her for the honor of the North. Time would tell how many responded. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in King's Landing seemed oddly brighter, as if some malevolent cloud had lifted. People smiled more readily at Sansa, congratulating her on her official title. Tommen appeared relieved, pleased to have made a decisive ruling. Margaery, though busy with her many responsibilities, made time to share quiet moments of encouragement with Sansa, reassuring her that the crown would remain steadfast in its support, though if it came to war, the resources would be limited. Sansa did not mind that limitation. She sought to free the North with northern strength, not an invading southern army. All she truly needed was for the Iron Throne not to side with the Boltons. She had that now. Late one evening, while Sansa paced her chamber, a message arrived from Petyr Baelish. It invited her to a private supper at his estate in the city to discuss matters of mutual interest. Sansa felt a flicker of dread. She suspected he wanted to probe her intentions in the north, or perhaps offer some cunning arrangement. Though she was tempted to refuse, she decided it might be wise to face him directly, to see if he intended to undermine her newfound status. She informed Margaery, who cautioned her to be careful, and arranged for Ser Tallad and a pair of trustworthy guards to accompany her. She arrived at Baelish's estate the next evening, stepping into a modest dining hall lit by flickering candles. Soft music played from a lute in the corner, and the table was set with fine silverware. Baelish, dressed in a subdued black doublet, greeted her with a courteous bow. No other guests were present except for a few silent servants. "Lady Sansa," he murmured, "I'm honored you accepted my invitation." She inclined her head, stepping forward to take a seat across from him. "You wish to speak with me, my lord? About what, precisely?" He smiled, leaning back. "Straight to the point. Very well. First, allow me to congratulate you on your new status. Warden of the North, impressive indeed. I only regret that I was not consulted more thoroughly before such a monumental announcement." Sansa forced her face to remain calm. "You're Lord Protector of the Vale, not the North. Why would you need consulting?" His lips twitched, an almost patronizing flicker. "Because I've had some dealings in the North, as you well know. Harrenhal sits in the Riverlands, a strategic crossroads for any campaign heading north. I might have made your transition smoother had you involved me from the start." She felt a surge of annoyance. "I prefer to rely on allies who truly want the Boltons gone." "Did you?" He shrugged. "I want what's best for the realm, my dear, and for you. Our fates have long been intertwined. Surely you remember how I saved you from King's Landing after Joffrey's death, whisked you away from that viper's nest. The memory of him spiriting her out of the city, only to deliver her into further manipulations, made her bristle. Saved me? You took me from one predicament to another, never telling me your full intentions." "I remember." He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "You've grown more mistrustful than I recall. Perhaps that's wise. Yet consider this. You will need every ally you can gather if the Boltons resist. War is not always avoided by a royal decree, especially in a land as vast as the North. Houses that fear Bolton retaliation might waver. Some might remain on the fence, uncertain if the crown will truly commit forces to aid you. But if you had the Vale at your side, She stiffened. Tommen has recognized me. That's enough. If the Vale chooses to stand with the crown, they will answer Tommen's call. Baelish nodded slowly as though pitying her naivety. The Vale is loyal to young Robin Arryn. I speak for him. He is easily swayed. You may find that a direct royal command is not enough to mobilize the Vale. A personal appeal, however, might do wonders. Sansa felt her frustration mount. So you're offering the Vale swords in exchange for what? He smiled. Nothing so crude as exchange. Let's call it a partnership. Once you reclaim Winterfell, you will need strong allies to keep it. Storm clouds gather from many directions, White Walkers in the far north, Targaryen dragons in the east, and let's not forget dear Cersei licking her wounds at Casterly Rock. If you align yourself with me, together we could ensure that any threat is swiftly managed. The north, the Vale, and if necessary, the Riverlands through Harrenhal. Sansa took a breath. She knew the path of alliance with Baelish was a slippery slope. He would use it to worm his way into controlling the north. She recalled how he had once proposed marrying her to Robin Arryn. Or perhaps now he harbored thoughts of marrying her himself to become Lord of Winterfell. The idea made her skin crawl. She stared him down. I appreciate your concern, my lord, but I have no interest in forging such an alliance. The North stands with the crown, not with you personally. If the Vale is truly loyal to King Tommen, then that's enough for me. I will not trade my freedom or the North's into your hands. His eyes flickered, and for a moment she glimpsed anger beneath his polished veneer. Then he bowed his head. As you wish, Lady Sansa. I only seek to protect you from the storms to come. She rose from her seat. I protect myself now, Lord Baelish. Good evening. Without waiting for a response, she turned and departed, her guards trailing. Her heart thudded with adrenaline, but she felt a wave of grim satisfaction. For years, she had let Baelish's honeyed words sway her. She had been frightened of him, uncertain if he was her savior or her captor. Now she was sure of her own stance. She would not let him shape her destiny. If he tried to sabotage her or the North, she would confront him openly. Returning to the Red Keep, she found Margaery waiting in a corridor near her chambers. Sansa recounted the conversation, her tone tense. Margaery listened and pressed her lips together. He's dangerous. Be cautious. But he has lost this particular round, it seems. You're named Warden of the North. The Vale, by all official accounts, supports the king. If he tries to betray Tommen, he risks losing his position. We'll keep watch. Sansa nodded. She felt weary but resolute. The next day, she penned letters to the Vale Lords directly, encouraging them to join the crown's condemnation of the Boltons. She bypassed Baelish entirely. Let him simmer. She had no time for his games. The real test lay in the north, where winter loomed. As the official start of winter was proclaimed across Westeros, fresh news drifted south. In the far north, the Boltons, enraged by Tommen's decree, had locked the gates of Winterfell and refused to acknowledge Sansa's claim. Word came that Ramsay Bolton had mobilized men from the Dreadfort, forcing smaller houses to either march under his banner or face ruin. A standoff brewed. Meanwhile, House Manderley in White Harbor openly declared for Sansa, joined by some Serwans, Tallhearts, and Barrow Tun men. It was not yet a full rebellion, but the region was dividing. Neither side had a clear advantage in numbers or resources. For the moment, winter storms threatened to trap armies in snow, limiting large-scale offensives. Sansa read these dispatches with mounting concern. She worried for the innocent small folk caught between factions, the potential for hunger and suffering. She could not simply stay in King's Landing forever while the Boltons dug in. If the roads were passable, she might need to travel north to rally her supporters in person. But the timing was fraught. Margaery cautioned her that leaving now, in the dead of winter, might be unwise. The journey could be perilous and the risk of a showdown with Ramsay's forces too great. Yet Sansa felt a pull she could no longer ignore. She was Warden of the North in name, but to truly claim that seat, she had to be present. She spoke to Tommen in a private audience, requesting permission to depart the capital with a small retinue to go north. Tommen looked uneasy but ultimately agreed, so long as she accepted a small royal escort for safety. Margaery insisted that they coordinate carefully with House Manderley to ensure she could travel by ship to White Harbor, bypassing much of the Frozen Land route. That at least reduce the journey's peril. Sansa knew the risks but felt there was no other choice. In the final evening before her planned departure, she walked the Red Keep's corridors, remembering the frightened girl she had been when she arrived years ago. Now she left on her own terms, recognized as the rightful Lady of Winterfell, carrying letters of royal endorsement and the blessings of King Tommen. She had formed an alliance with Margaery Tyrell that had changed the face of King's Landing and unseated the Queen Mother's tyranny. She had helped shape a more just small council. Yet her greatest trial lay ahead, in the snowbound fields of the north, where the Boltons lurked. She could only pray that her careful planning, her alliances, and her newly claimed authority would be enough to avert a bloody war, and that the monstrous rumors of the White Walkers would not eclipse everything. She found Margaery in the Godswood Garden, a grove transplanted from the original Faith's land, with a single weirwood sapling that had never truly flourished in the southern heat. It was a poor imitation of a northern godswood, but the pale trunk gave Sansa a faint sense of home. Margaery stood with her cloak drawn, gazing at the sapling's red leaves with solemnity. Sansa approached quietly, and they stood together before the tree. Margaery's hand found Sansa's, and for a moment they simply listened to the wind in the leaves. "You depart tomorrow," Margaery said at last, her voice soft. "I'll miss you, my friend." Sansa squeezed her hand gently. "I'll miss you too, but I must see this through. The Boltons can't be allowed to remain. My people have suffered enough." Margaery turned, her eyes reflecting candlelight. "I know, and I understand. I'll keep the city stable in your absence. Ensure that Tommen remains supportive of your cause. If you need more resources, send word, though I fear the city's coffers grow thin." Sansa managed a small smile. "Your support has meant everything to me. I won't forget it." Margaery released her hand, stepping back. "Go reclaim your home. Show the North that House Stark stands again. And if the day comes when a greater threat descends from beyond the wall, we will stand with you. The realm will need unity more than ever." Sansa felt tears threaten. "Thank you for helping me topple Cersei peacefully, for believing in me when I was just a frightened girl. For all of it." Margaery closed her eyes briefly. "We believed in each other. That's how we survived. I only hope we can continue that belief across the many miles that will soon separate us." They parted after a gentle embrace, their friendship forged in the crucible of King's Landing's intrigues. When Sansa returned to her chambers to pack her final belongings, she felt a swirl of anticipation, fear, and cautious hope. The next morning, she mounted a carriage that would take her to the harbor, where a Tyrell-commissioned ship awaited to sail her to White Harbor. A small retinue of guards and loyal attendants accompanied her. Margaery stood by the keep's gates to watch her depart, a sad but proud smile on her face. Tommen waved, flanked by Lancel and the other King's Guard, and Baelish stood in the background, wearing an inscrutable expression. As the carriage rolled away from the Red Keep, Sansa gazed out at the city. Once it had been her prison and her torment, now she left it by choice, strengthened by alliances, carrying the authority to restore her birthright. A hush settled over her. This moment felt monumental, a turning point in her life's journey. She thought of her father, how he had once served as Hand of the King, trying to do what was right until it cost him his head. She promised herself she would not let House Stark's legacy die. She had come so far from that naive girl who only wanted songs and gallant knights. She had navigated the labyrinth of the capital's politics, formed a secret council with Margaery Tyrell, and toppled Cersei peacefully. Now she rode north, determined to bring justice to her homeland. When the carriage reached the bustling docks, she stepped out into the crisp air. Seagulls wheeled overhead and the tang of salt filled her lungs. The ship awaited, sails flapping, ready to brave the choppy waters. She took one last look over her shoulder at the city's skyline, the red walls and towers shining in the pale morning light. Then she ascended the gangplank and the lines were cast off. As the vessel glided out into Blackwater Bay, Sansa felt a flutter of anticipation. The next chapter of her life unfurled before her, fraught with unknown perils but guided by her unwavering resolve. With each gust of wind pushing the ship farther from King's Landing, she carried the memory of Margaery's parting words. They had done the impossible once, forging peace out of tyranny. Perhaps they could do it again in the north or anywhere that needed it. She watched the city shrink behind them, knowing that many challenges lay ahead, the Boltons' defiance, the savage northern winter, and the looming specter of White Walkers. But she would face them not as a pawn, but as a player in her own right, a Stark of Winterfell, forging a destiny shaped by quiet courage and steadfast allies. And in that knowledge, she found a flicker of hope bright enough to guide her through the cold, dark unknown.